never thought I'd be someone who received disturbing phone calls. I'd get the occasional wrong number, the usual hang-ups, but this was different. It was a week before Halloween when the calls began. At first, it was just a voice that I didn't recognize, a raspy whisper that would hang up as soon as I said hello. After a few days, the calls became more frequent. I found myself checking my phone every few minutes, my heart racing whenever it buzzed. One night, as I sat on my couch, the call came through again. "I can see you," the voice said on the other end, low and chilling. I fired a couple questions back to the phone, such as, "Who is this, and how did you get my number?" There was a pause, then the line went dead. I didn't sleep much that night, due to the thought of someone watching me in my own house. The next day at work, I shared my experience with my friend Mark. He said that it might just be somebody trying to scare me, but that I should still report it. But I didn't report it, and I just hoped that it wouldn't happen again. But the calls continued. One evening, as I was leaving the office, I received another call. "I'm right behind you," the phone whispered. I quickly spun around and scanned the street, but saw nothing unusual and nobody behind me. I still thought it was a prank, and I chalked it up to coincidence. On Halloween, I decided to stay late and work to avoid the festive crowds. As the office emptied out and I packed up my things that evening, my phone rang again. The number was unknown, but the voice was the same familiar raspy tone which said, "You think you're safe? It's time to come out." It was nearly 9 p.m. when I stepped out onto the sidewalk to start my walk home. I pulled out my phone and tried to call my coworker Mark to see if I could get a ride. He didn't answer, so I began walking, but was cautious to check my surroundings every so often. I was certain that I saw a shadow suddenly move behind me. I glanced back, but I only saw the dim glow of a street lamp. I quickened my pace, trying to shake the feeling of being followed. My phone rang right after that, and I pulled it out hoping that it was Mark calling me back. Instead, it was the same number from earlier that night that I had gotten a call from when I was in the office. I chose to ignore it and began walking even faster. I continued to turn around and check my surroundings during my walk, and that's when I saw for the first time that I was being followed. I fumbled to call Mark again, constantly checking to see if the figure in the darkness behind me was speeding up or gaining on me at all. Mark actually picked up this time, and I sent him my location saying that I was being followed and I needed a ride. Mark must have driven fast, because it only took about 5 minutes for him to get to my location. As he turned onto the street I was on and approached me, I watched as the figure that had been following me began walking the other way and eventually disappeared. That night was the last time I got a call from that number. I'm hoping that it was just an awful prank, since it did happen right on Halloween, but it was so elaborate that I doubt it. A while back, I accidentally called the wrong number on my cell phone. I was trying to call a mechanic to work on my car that had an oil leak. However, I must have dialed wrong. When someone picked up the phone, it was a man's voice who asked why I was calling in a sort of strange tone. I said my name, and I asked if this was a mechanic that I was trying to reach. He said no, and once again in a strange tone, he asked me why I had called that number. I said that I must have dialed wrong by mistake and I didn't mean to, and I apologized. The person on the other end of the phone just said, "Okay." Then they hung up. The whole interaction just seemed really weird to me, but overall I was glad that it was over. I dialed again, and this time correctly got the mechanic that I was going for. But not long after I got off the phone with the mechanic, there was a call back from the first number that I had called. I answered and said hello, but was hung up on immediately without anybody saying anything. I didn't know if it was a mistake or what, but after that they didn't call me again. So during this time, I was renting a house and I lived by myself. The house was pretty small, and it was on a street with a lot of other houses that was fairly populated. It was common to see people walking down the sidewalk and stuff, and cars parking on the side of the street as well. But despite that, I started to notice strange things. The first was that I saw this car parked right across the street from my house really late at night. This was the very next night. I'm not sure exactly how I noticed the car parking right away. I think I just happened to be near the window and noticed it. But this man got out and he just kind of stood around by the car. He was looking around and I moved away from the window, but I kept watching him. The man looked in the direction of my house several times, like that was his main focus. By now, I was suspicious. However, the man did not really do anything. After about 10 minutes, he went back into the car. He didn't drive away though. Before going to bed, I saw that he was still in the driver's seat of that same car, and that was like half an hour later. I was really weirded out. Nothing seemed to happen though, and the next morning he was gone. The next day, I saw these two guys walking down the street, but this time it was during the daytime. They were both wearing sunglasses, and I only noticed them because they went back and forth down the sidewalk a bunch of times. They kept passing by my house and kind of glancing over. They went by at least 10 times in the span of an hour, and I had never seen them before prior to that. They also weren't doing any work or anything like that. I didn't know what was up with them. Then, later on that night, I was passing by the front of the house, and I caught somebody running out of my front yard. I couldn't tell who it was, other than it appeared to be a man, and he ran off down the street and out of my sight. Things like that hadn't been happening prior to this. I didn't know what was going on. There were more small things that happened that I'm not really sure about. Things like cars pulling into my driveway just to turn around, people walking down the street late at night, or unknown vehicles parking on the side of the road across from my house at all hours of the day and night, and the driver never getting out. For like a week, these things happened all the time. I had no idea why. Slowly, they decreased though, and then seemed to stop. I wasn't sure if I was just randomly paranoid for some reason, or if something was going on. And the phone call was so strange, I feel like they might be linked. Because prior to the phone call, I didn't notice anything like that happening, and almost right after, I noticed it. But overall, I don't really know anything. Nothing that definitive happened, like nobody tried to break into my house, and nobody knocked on my door. It was all really sketchy and suspicious things that just makes me wonder. I'm just glad that nothing strange has happened since then, and these things seem to have stopped. It remains a bit of a mystery. This is something that happened at the last apartment building that I lived in. Overall, it was a pretty nice place. The building was fairly new, and it wasn't super cheap or anything. I liked living there for the most part. It wasn't perfect, but it was still pretty good. The apartment complex consisted of 3 buildings. 2 were right across from each other, and then the third was next to the first building. Running between all the buildings was a parking lot, and then there were sidewalks going all around the property. Surrounding the property were a few residential roads on one end, and then some commercial businesses on the other. Each building had 4 floors to it, so overall the apartment complex was pretty average. So one evening I was at home by myself and had recently gotten home from work. I think it was probably like 7 p.m. or so, and it was dark out by now. I got a call on my cell phone from a number that was in the same city as me, but the person was not in my contacts list. When I answered it, it was a woman's voice, and she said that there was a package for me in the mailroom. She said that she was one of the managers of the apartment complex, and she was letting me know that the package had been there for a couple of days, and maybe I didn't know about it and I should come and pick it up now. I was not aware that there was a package for me there, so I said thanks for letting me know. In fact, I hadn't ordered anything in a while, so I wasn't really sure what it could be. She asked me if I was home right now, and I said yes, and then she said that I should come down right now and get it, so I said that I would. Then we hung up, and I got my shoes on and left the apartment. My place was on the 3rd floor, so I walked down to the elevator and then got in it and took it down to the 1st floor. The mailroom in my building was inside the lobby but outside of the locking doors. Inside the first set of doors when you entered the building, but to the left of the second set of doors, was a small room for package deliveries. It was accessible to delivery drivers and DoorDash people that way, but it also meant that people could potentially steal the packages. However, I had never had a problem with that. So I walked off the elevator through the empty and quiet lobby and then went out the first set of doors. Then I turned and entered the small mailroom, and there was nobody else in the mailroom. There were a number of packages lying around though. Many people would take forever to pick up their packages and probably didn't even know that they were there. So there was always like 10 or 20 boxes just sitting around on the ground or on the shelves. I looked around and picked up every single package and looked at the name, but there wasn't any that were for me. I was confused. In the time that I was there looking, I remember hearing the doors from the outside open, and I glanced over to see 2 large men enter the building. But they did not go in the second set of doors. Instead, they just stopped and stood around by the second set of doors, indicating that they did not live there. My thought was that they were waiting for somebody to come down and let them in. I just continued to look for my package. I literally picked up every single box in the mailroom twice and read every single name. But there was nothing for me. I was so confused now. I even opened up my small mailbox that was also in the room, but that too was empty. Why had this woman called me and told me to get my package now? I know that she had told me it was in the mailroom. Had she also called the other 20 or so people who had packages in the mailroom as well? And now it wasn't even there. Also, it was past business hours in the apartment offices, which closed at 5 p.m., so it was strange that she was calling me after hours for this as well. I had the idea that maybe she took the package to the office, although it seemed like a long shot, or maybe she had mixed me up with somebody else and called the wrong number. I didn't even know who this woman was. I had only briefly met one staff member of the apartment complex when I picked up my keys moving in long before this. So anyways, I decided to go back in the building. But now I had another dilemma. These two large men were still just standing by the doors, and had been there for like 2 or 3 minutes now, as I had been aimlessly searching around for my non-existent package. I didn't want to be the one to let them in, but as I walked over, figured I had no choice. We were not supposed to let people in the building unless we knew them, obviously, so I would prefer that whoever they were waiting for would let them in. As I made it to the lobby, I had the thought to just leave the building and then walk around and enter through a side door, but I told myself, no, don't be weird like that, just go in. So I walked over and unlocked the door with my key fob, but I was not going to hold the door open for these guys or anything. Hopefully they would be nice and not go in, but wait for their friend or whoever. As I walked past them, they said nothing. When I opened the now unlocked door, I heard them instantly start to quickly walk towards me. Before the door was even starting to close, one of the men grabbed it in a borderline aggressive fashion. They basically barged in right behind me and didn't say anything still. It kind of ticked me off, but I just ignored it and started walking into the lobby. The two men followed. I turned to the right and decided not to use the elevator. If these men were going upstairs, that would be really awkward, so I turned to the right to take the hallway down to the stairwell. But when I turned right, the men did as well, going right past the obvious elevator. So now, either A, they were going to a room over here, B, they just wanted to take the stairs for whatever reason, or C, they were following me. I hoped that it was not C. I walked down the hallway until I reached the doors to the stairwell. When I entered them, soon after, the men did as well. They were walking maybe 10 feet behind me. By this point, I was really nervous, so I decided to just leave the building. Before turning to go up the stairs, there's an exit door which is a side door to the building. As I walked, instead of going past it, I just opened the door and left. When I did, unbelievably, both men left the building as well. Now I knew that they were both following me, and I had no clue who these guys were. Basically, just out of instincts and a reaction, I just took off running. I sprinted down the sidewalk heading towards the now back side of the building. I made it to the corner and now heard both of the two men starting to sprint after me. I'm pretty fast, so I had that going for me. I just hoped that I was faster than these two men. After getting around the corner, I sprinted along the quiet back sidewalk of the apartment complex. I ran the entire stretch of it and felt like I had put a little distance between myself and the men. But I didn't slow down. I turned to the left and now sprinted back along the side of my building. There was another side door there. When I reached that side door, I very quickly slowed down. At that moment, the two men chasing me were now just reaching the corner. I knew that I had one shot to unlock the door, and I quickly took out my key fob and put it up to the door. Thankfully, it unlocked. I very quickly opened the door as I heard the men running towards me and quickly getting closer. I went inside and then made sure to slam the door shut behind me and it would automatically lock. When I did, I still heard the men approaching. Then I turned and started running for the staircase in that stairwell, which was the same thing as the other side of the building, just opposite. As I went to the stairs, the men reached the door, and I heard them trying to open it, but they couldn't get in. Then they started banging on the door as I ran up the stairs. I didn't stop running until I got up to the 3rd floor, and only then did I feel much better and started to calm down. I walked back to my apartment and went inside. Then I thought about the whole situation, and I realized the phone call was probably a setup. I called the cops on the guys and reported them, but when the police got there, the men were gone. They looked around but could not find them. The next day, I went to the apartment offices and met the managers. The woman who called me was not someone who worked there, so she was in fact just trying to get me downstairs. It was all a setup. I don't know who she was or who those men were, and I don't know what they wanted either, but I thankfully never saw them again. When my lease was up, I moved, and I now live in a different apartment in a different city, but I will never forget that crazy experience. A few years ago, I attended a sports game and ended up forgetting my phone there in the stadium. I just know that when I got back, I couldn't find my phone. I had lost it and didn't have any idea as to where it was at first. Now, to be honest with you, I'm not even 100% sure that I did lose it at the sports game, but that was the only thing that made sense to me. I know I had it at the game, and when I got back, I did not. I don't recall using it at all on the way home. So I live in an apartment and live by myself. It's maybe 15 minutes from the sports stadium where the game was. After losing my phone, I was devastated. However, I figured that there was nothing that I could do. I actually called the sports stadium, and they do have a lost and found there. However, after describing the phone and where I was sitting, they said they unfortunately did not have it. The next morning, I was lost without my phone. Like most people, I use it every day for almost everything. So I started looking online for a new one. I didn't want to just buy a brand new phone with how expensive it is, but I also knew that I couldn't go that long without a cell phone. Now, that night, I still hadn't bought a new one as I had been doing research into deals online. I had made up my mind that I would just cut my losses and get a new phone the next day, because I didn't really see any deals that were that great. I would go to my service provider and tell them what happened. However, at like 11 p.m. that night, there was a random knock at my front door. I went over to the door wondering who was there. At my apartment, I really never got knocks on the door, so this was already strange, but with it being so late at night, it made it even more weird. I went over to the door and looked through the peephole to see that nobody was there. So then I carefully opened my door. When I did not see anybody in the hallway, but I did see a phone on the ground at my doormat. It was my cell phone. It seemed like a miracle, and I couldn't believe it. I picked it up and took it inside. The phone was just how I left it. Somebody must have found it and brought it back to me. I didn't know who it was, but I was very grateful. That is, until the strange things started happening. I went onto my phone and saw that some things were different. Like, for example, there were some new photos and videos in my camera roll. There were a bunch of pictures of the street at night, and the videos appeared to be taken by somebody just walking along the street at night. I couldn't see anybody in the videos though, or the pictures, so I didn't know who it was who had found my phone. And then there were some either screenshots or downloaded photos from the 1990s live-action Ninja Turtles movie. It was really strange. Then there was this phone tracking app that I didn't have before. I didn't know what it was, so I deleted it. But that wasn't it. Starting that very same night, I started getting a bunch of random phone calls. At first, I did not answer because I didn't recognize the numbers, but then they called again and again. I eventually picked up, only to be hung up on. And it wasn't just one number, there were several different numbers calling me. I would answer sometimes and either be hung up on or just hear silence on the other end. Sometimes they would leave messages too, but the messages would either just be long periods of silence or be just breathing noises. It was really strange. I started to block all the numbers. There were probably 10 of them in total, and it took like a week of blocking to get them all. Eventually, it finally ended. I'm still wondering who brought my phone back. I mean, I'm grateful that they did, but also, what did they do? Was it all just a prank, or was somebody trying to scare me? I think they got my address and stuff because they were probably able to get into my phone. My passcode was 1234, but I have since changed it. This happened a long time ago, back around the year 2000. I was 12 years old and I lived at home with just my mom and my older sister. At the time, my sister, who was 16, had gone to a friend's house for the night. My mom was gone working late, which she occasionally did, and I never really knew exactly when she would be home from work. It was a Friday night, and after getting home from school and doing my homework, I was getting hungry. By the time it was around 6:30, I decided to call my mom to try to find out when she would be home. If not, maybe she would let me order a pizza or something. Back then, I did not have a cell phone, but my mom did. Obviously, it was not a smartphone, and I had to dial the whole number from the home phone every time I were to call. So I remember that I dialed and then waited for my mom to pick up the phone. However, nobody answered. There was this robotic message that said, "This call has been sent to voicemail." I was sort of confused, but then I decided to leave my mom a message. I told her that my sister had left and I was home by myself, and I was wondering when she would be back or if I should order something. Then I hung up the phone. About 5 minutes later, the phone rang. I picked it up figuring that it was my mom, and sure enough, it was. She told me that she was still stuck at work and said that my sister could take me somewhere to get food if I wanted. I told her that she was gone, and I asked if she had gotten my message. My mom said no, she hadn't got a message. I figured maybe her cell phone was broken, or maybe the answering machine with it was broken. Back then, technology wasn't quite what it is today. So we talked briefly, and my mom said that she would be home in maybe an hour or so. Then we hung up, and I decided that I would wait for her. So I was in the living room about 10 minutes later and the telephone rang again. I thought that it was either my mom again or maybe my sister, so I picked it up. When I did, it was neither, but a man's voice on the other end. I did not recognize his voice, but he said hello. When I asked who was calling, the man said that I had left him a message earlier. I was confused and said no, I didn't. He said that I had and asked why I called him and started asking who I was and stuff. I said that it must be a mistake, and I remember that he said he was not mad at me. I was kind of getting creeped out by the guy, so I just hung up the phone. It was a short time later, though, that I realized that I must have called him after all. When I had tried to call my mom the first time, I must have called him by mistake. He must have been who I left the message for. It was weird, but I also thought that when the guy called me, he was acting kind of strange. I just hoped that he wouldn't call again, and he didn't. However, probably 30 minutes later, and my mom still wasn't home yet. I was in the living room when out of nowhere there was a knock at our front door. I got up and went to a window to look outside before answering. I saw this random man standing there. He was a little bit bigger of a guy and looked fairly young for an adult and had sort of large glasses. Because I didn't know who he was, I was not going to answer the door. The man knocked again and I still did nothing. Then I remembered that he did something that really surprised me. He tried opening the front door. Thank God it was locked. Now I was really creeped out and I was about to run to the phone and call the police, but the man stepped away from the door. He started to walk around the house but then backed off. He walked back over to his car while looking around at both our house and the neighbors. After going down the driveway, he got into his car, which was parked out in the street. Then he drove away. I called my mom after that and told her about the guy. She was thankfully on her way home. When she got back, the man was long gone. He did not return. Since then, I feel like the man who tried to enter our house was the guy that I accidentally called. I don't know how he would have got our address though, but I think it's too crazy to be a coincidence.
This is something that happened to me in the 1990s. My name is Jennifer, and I had recently moved into a house in a pretty typical neighborhood. It was about 30 minutes outside of a major city, and I was renting a smaller 2-bedroom house. I lived by myself at the time, and had a cord phone that was attached to the wall in the kitchen. That was my only phone back then, and I didn't even have a cell phone yet. I randomly got a call late at night one time. It was probably around 10 o'clock, but I don't remember exactly. It's usually unusual to get calls at that hour from telemarketers. I guessed it was probably from a family member or friend, and I answered it. When I picked up the phone, there was a man on the other end. I didn't immediately recognize his voice. He said, "Hi, is this Jennifer speaking?" I said yes, and asked who this was that was calling. He didn't really answer me, but the guy started talking. He said that I was the most beautiful woman he had ever seen. Then he described my hair in detail as he went on and on about how he liked me. I thought this was really weird, because I didn't even know who this guy was. I didn't recognize his voice, and when I asked him again who he was, he didn't answer me. When he refused to tell me who he was, I was feeling really weird about it. I ended up just hanging up on him. It was one of the stranger phone calls that I had ever gotten. Clearly, this guy had seen me before. He described enough of me, and he also knew my name somehow. But I knew all the people at my job, and he didn't sound like anybody there. I just didn't know who it could be. I was hoping that he wouldn't call back, but he did, just a short time later. It was probably 10 minutes after I had hung up on him the first time. When I answered the phone, I heard him talking again, and almost hung up on him immediately. But what he said shocked me so much that I couldn't. He said, "Let me in." That was followed by a knocking at my front door. Whoever this guy was right outside my house. I couldn't believe it. I didn't even want to look out to see who the guy was. I was too scared. My blinds were closed anyways, so I couldn't see him. I didn't say anything to the man, and he repeated himself. Finally, I asked him to go away. The man said that he wasn't going to. Then I heard him knock again. I told him that I was going to call the police if he didn't leave. He didn't seem bothered by that. He said something like, "What are they going to do?" I hung up on him after that and dialed 911. I told the operator what was going on, and I was told that somebody would be there shortly. After I got off the phone with the police, I did not hear any more knocking. The guy also didn't call me back. After maybe 10 minutes, the police got there. An officer knocked on the door, which I thought was the man again at first. I checked out the window though and saw a police officer. I let him in and told him what had happened. He looked around my front and backyard, searching the entire property. Unfortunately, the man was gone. He must have left after I called them. The officer asked me a few questions and said that he would be around the area for a while. He said if something happened, to call again. I felt slightly better, but not a whole lot knowing this guy was still out there. I was afraid he might try to break in. After the police left, probably 20 minutes or so went by. That's when I heard a knocking on my front door again. My heart sank, knowing it was probably the same guy coming back, but there was a chance that it was the police again. I carefully and slowly crept towards my front window. I moved the blinds very slightly, just enough to see who was there. I didn't get a good view at all, but it was not a police officer, I could tell. When I saw this, I moved away from the window and ran back to the phone. I called the police again and told them that the man had returned. I was only on the phone with the police for probably a minute or so. After I got off the phone with them, the man called. He was still knocking on the door every so often. I answered his call, wondering what he wanted now. He said, "You shouldn't have called the cops on me, Jennifer." Then he asked me to let him in again. I really didn't know what to say, and I was really nervous. Eventually, I just hung up. But only about a minute or two after this, I heard voices outside my house. The police had come back, and it sounded like they had actually caught the man. I went to my window and looked out. Sure enough, it was true. When I saw the guy, though, I couldn't believe it. It was my next-door neighbor, a guy who lived alone in the house next to me named Dan. I had only spoken to him briefly once, but he must have seen me when I went outside. Sometimes I would go on walks in the neighborhood or do yard work. What a creep that guy was. I was able to get a restraining order against him, and luckily after that, I never saw him again.
Something really bizarre happened to me a couple of years ago. I got a new cell phone and new number. I had been needing a new phone for a while, and my previous service was not very good. But after switching over, I soon started to get strange phone calls and texts. The first was a phone call from a number that I didn't recognize. Obviously, I didn't really recognize any of the new numbers after getting the phone, but when I answered, a man spoke and asked me why I hadn't been returning his calls. I realized that he must have the wrong number, and I told him that. But when I did, for some strange reason, he didn't believe me. So after that, I just hung up on him. But sometime later, I received a text message from a different number. This text said something like, "Hey, call me when you get the chance." Once more, I didn't know the number, and I replied asking who it was. They responded with a name I didn't know, and I told them that they had the wrong number. This person did not respond. Over the next week or so, I got at least 10 different text messages and probably 10 phone calls. Most of them were from different phone numbers, but some were the same. I responded to most of them saying wrong number. I realized that most likely the previous person to have my phone number must have not told their contacts that they changed numbers, and they must have had a lot of friends or something. I answered another one of the random calls out of curiosity. It was another man who I didn't know, and I told him that he had the wrong number and I had recently gotten a new one. The man on the other end was saying that he didn't understand. I started to explain to him that I got a new phone and new service, but he then hung up on me. I put up with random texts and sometimes calls for the next few days. Almost everything I just started ignoring. Some people who I had already told them they had the wrong number continued to text me. It was kind of annoying, and I even considered asking to change numbers. Then I got a text from someone who had already texted me multiple times. They said that I needed to cut the crap and nobody was buying my new number nonsense. Then they said something like, my life could be made miserable if I didn't start cooperating. I read that and I was thinking to myself, who on earth had this number before me? I didn't respond and wasn't really sure what to do. But I received another text saying that they could find me and I couldn't hide forever. By this point, most of the threatening texts were coming from 2 or 3 different numbers. And after these sort of texts went on for a few days, I couldn't take it anymore. I went to the police and I also went to get a new phone number. I told the cops my whole situation, and they told me that I should get a new number and they would handle the investigation. So I did get a new number, and after that I wasn't bothered again.
I also never heard anything more about those people though, who they were or anything. I still wonder why I was getting those texts.
When I was about 10 years old, I was home alone with my little brother Ethan. Our parents had gone out for groceries and left me in charge of watching my brother. They always warned us about strangers, especially when it came to phone calls. They had instructed us in the past that if we ever didn't know the person calling on the landline number, to say that our parents were busy and to never mention that we were home alone. I remember Ethan was playing with his action figures in the living room while I sat at the kitchen table trying to finish my homework. That's when the phone rang. I picked up the phone and answered hello, trying to make my voice sound deeper. There was a brief pause on the other end, and then a low voice said, "Is your mom there?" I hesitated, remembering our parents' warning. No, she's busy right now," I replied. The voice asked me where my parents were, and I quickly made up something about them being at a neighbor's house. The voice seemed satisfied and hung up. I shook it off, but a knot of worry formed. I went back to doing my homework, and not long after, the phone rang again. I picked it up with a bit more dread this time, hoping that it was somebody that I knew. It was the same voice again, asking where our parents were and when they would be back. I tried to sound calm and collected as I replied that they were still busy, but I could take a message for them. The voice on the other end didn't respond and just hung up. I glanced over at Ethan, who was now standing next to me looking confused and scared. The phone rang again, and this time I didn't think about answering. Instead, I told Ethan to come upstairs with me and hide just in case, since I was really scared now. We made our way up to my room, shutting the door behind us and hiding in the closet. I could still hear the phone ringing downstairs. Time crawled by slowly, and a couple more phone calls worth of rings went by. Then it was finally quiet. Just when I thought that I might be overreacting by hiding in the closet, we heard knocking on the front door downstairs. We listened in silence as we heard the front door, and then after a bit, the back door attempted to be pushed open. No more sounds came from downstairs for what felt like at least 10 minutes, until finally the garage door opened and we could hear our parents' voices downstairs. Relief washed over me as we ran downstairs to greet them, happy that they were home. I explained about the calls and the knocking downstairs to my parents. My dad quickly grabbed the phone and dialed the number. I don't know who he was talking to. I'm guessing a neighbor or the police. After that day, my parents reassured my brother and I that something like that wouldn't happen again, and that they wouldn't leave us home alone again until we were older.
I was hanging out in my living room just watching TV in my apartment one night. It was a relaxing evening until my phone rang. When I looked, I saw that it was a number I didn't recognize, so I didn't answer. A short time later, I got a notification that I had a new voicemail. I thought that it was odd how somebody that I didn't know had just called me and left a voicemail. I figured it was some kind of a scam, but I decided to play the message. So I went on my phone and listened to it. A person with a kind of weird voice said, "Marcus, congratulations, call me back." My name is not Marcus. I figured that this person had the wrong number. I had no idea why somebody would be congratulating me or calling me Marcus. I texted the number saying, "I am not Marcus, I think you have the wrong number." Literally right after this, they called me back. I did not like the fact that they had called me instead of texting me, but I decided to answer to try to clear the air. As soon as I said hello, the man with the weird voice said, "Hi, Marcus." The way that the guy spoke was just strange. It was not just the way his voice sounded, but also his tone and overall everything. I stopped him and said, "I'm not Marcus, you have the wrong number." The person insisted that I was. He said, "Marcus, congratulations." I was so confused that I was speechless. I literally said nothing. The guy then said, "Congratulations, Marcus," and then he hung up. At that point, I thought that it had to be now a prank. Somebody was pulling a joke on me. Why this was a joke, I had no idea. Who's Marcus? I don't know. I also didn't know who would be doing this because I didn't recognize the voice at all. I also have all my friends' numbers saved.
It just didn't sound like a voice changer though, or one of those AI voices. There just seemed to be too much emotion in it. It sounded human. A short time later, they called again, which I let go to voicemail. The person left a voicemail once more, and when I listened to it, I only got more confused. The person calling said, "I'm calling you to say that you are Marcus, and I don't know why you keep denying it. Call me back when you have a chance, and congratulations." This was so weird. I didn't know what was going on. I did not call the person back. I didn't respond by text either. I really didn't know what to do. A few days went by, and I had no more calls or texts from this person. Then I came home to my apartment one evening to find an envelope at my front door. I picked it up, went inside, and then opened it. There was a letter that said at the start of it, "Congratulations, Marcus." The letter went on to say a whole bunch of nothing. It was typed out with a basic font. There was a lot of big words that sounded really complicated, but in my mind it pretty much added up to a whole lot of nothing. In the end though, I noticed that it said I had to pay them $10,000. I had no idea why. I ripped up the letter and threw it away. Since then, I have not received any more letters or calls or anything. But the fact that this person went to my apartment and knows where I live really creeps me out. I'm hoping that it was just a prank put on by a friend, but I just don't know who would do that or why. It just seems so random. I used to work night shifts as a security guard at a small manufacturing plant outside of town. It wasn't too massive, with just a few warehouses, an office building, and a parking lot surrounded by a chain-link fence. Most shifts went the same boring routine of sitting in the office, drinking coffee, doing some rounds, and trying not to fall asleep. One night in late fall, I was about halfway through my shift. It must have been around 1:30 or 2 a.m. I had just finished a walk around the perimeter and came back inside and everything was normal. I sat down at the desk and checked my phone. I remember scrolling for a bit, maybe 5 minutes, when I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. I almost ignored it, but I figured it could be something work-related. I answered, but it turned out to be the wrong number. I have no idea if this phone call had anything to do with what was going to happen next, but I figured I'd include it anyways. After a bit, I decided to do another round, so I grabbed my flashlight and stepped outside. I took a quick walk around the main warehouse, maybe 5 to 10 minutes at the most. Then I headed back to the office. When I opened the door, I stopped. The lights were off, which was weird since they were motion censored on 30-minute timers. The room was dark, except for the faint glow from a monitor. I went inside, and the light turned back on after sensing my movement. Everything looked normal at first. My coffee was still there. My jacket was on the chair. Nothing moved. When I looked at the clock on the wall, I was dumbfounded. It was 5:17 a.m. That didn't make any sense. I checked my phone thinking the clock had broken, but my phone had the same time. I also had numerous missed calls on my cell phone. A lot of them, all from my supervisor, were asking where I was, why I wasn't answering, and if I had left my post. The first message was around 2:10 a.m. The last one was just a few minutes before 5 a.m. I called my supervisor back. He answered right away, sounding angry. He said they'd been trying to reach me for hours. Apparently, an alarm had gone off in one of the storage buildings, and when they checked the cameras, they saw me walk out of the office around 2 a.m. and just not come back. I told him I had only been gone for a few minutes, and I was trying to process what in the world was going on. Later that day, I asked to see the footage from the security cameras. At 2:03 a.m., I got up from the desk and walked outside. That part matched what I remembered. But then, I walk out of view from the first camera in a bit of a blind spot, and I'm not seen anywhere on any of the cameras for the next 3 hours. At 5:11 a.m., suddenly I appeared back in view of a camera, and it showed me doing my quick 5-minute rounds check in a warehouse. Then I walked back inside the office, and that's when I saw the time and all my missed phone calls. I don't remember any of those missing 3 hours of time or what happened at all. The only thing I can remember is my regular 5-minute walk around the facility. I live alone and I still have a home phone. This is something that I've seen is less common nowadays because of cell phones, but I have a plan with the cable company where I get phone, internet, and TV in a bundle. So I still have a landline telephone in the house, but I will admit I hardly ever use it. However, something happened not long ago that is making me seriously consider getting rid of it altogether. I was at home by myself one evening not too long after arriving home from work. As I was watching TV in the living room, I heard the home phone ring. I wasn't sure who it was because I didn't get too many calls on that phone, and the ones that I do are usually just spam telemarketers or things like that. But it was nighttime now, so not the time when they usually called. I got up and walked over to the phone. I looked at the screen and it said, "Unknown caller." Now, this would be enough for most people to not answer, and normally I wouldn't either, but on this time, for whatever reason, I was curious and decided to answer the phone. When I did, I heard nothing at first. I said, "Hello?" and then said it again. There was still nothing. Then I heard a man on the other end of the phone who sounded upset. He said, "I think I have the wrong number." I said, "Okay, no problem." The man said nothing, but I could hear him breathing. It was really weird, so I hung up the phone. Then I went back to the couch. However, only about a half an hour later, the phone rang again. I went back over and it said "Unknown caller" again. I answered the phone once more because I was somehow even more curious now. It was the same guy. And this is what was really strange. Without me even saying anything, like right after I picked up, he said, "I think I have the wrong number." The same thing as he said before. Once more, he sounded borderline distraught. I was so confused. I said, "Okay, well, you called me again." He said nothing. I asked, "Who is it that you're trying to call?" The man started to say again, "I think I have the wrong number," but he hung up before he finished saying it, so he only said, "I think I have the and then he hung up. I was really weirded out by this guy. I didn't know why he kept calling me if he had the wrong number, and why did he sound so upset? Also, the fact that my caller ID said "unknown number" made the whole thing that much more creepy. I returned to the couch hoping that he would not call again, but he did. It was almost an hour later when the phone rang. I picked it up once more. This time, as soon as I picked up, I said, "Why do you keep calling me?" There was a long pause, and then the man said, "I think I have the wrong number." I said, "Call me again and I'm reporting you." Then I hung up on him. Now, I will admit, I do not know how to block a number on a home phone. I only know how to do that on a smartphone. So I just went back to what I was doing and hoped that he wouldn't call again. The phone rang again about an hour after that. By now, it was getting to be later at night. I got up and saw that it was "unknown caller" again. By now, I was fully freaked out. I thought about picking up, but decided not to. I thought that maybe if I didn't entertain this guy's madness, he would let me be. So I walked away. But then I heard the beep of the answering machine. I froze in my tracks and listened. The man started speaking. He said, "I think I have the wrong number." Then he repeated it again. "I think I have the wrong number." Each time he said it, he sounded more upset and distraught. He said it 4 times before being cut off during the 5th time and hanging up, ending the message. After that, he didn't call for over an hour. I figured my method of not answering the phone had worked. Soon I got ready for bed and headed to my room to go to sleep. I fell asleep without much problem despite being slightly creeped out, but I was awoken sometime in the middle of the night. As soon as I awoke, I heard the sound of the phone ringing. This was strange because although the phone ring could be heard from my bedroom, it wasn't loud enough to wake me up typically. Normally, I would sleep right through it, but not this time. I looked at the clock and it was 2 a.m. I heard the phone ringing and then it finally stopped and went to message. I was dreading hearing the voice again and could not believe that the guy was still calling me, especially at this hour. But he did not leave a message at all, which made me feel slightly better. However, the guy then simply called again. My phone was ringing once more. I still didn't answer. Then, after the phone ringing stopped, the guy called again about 30 seconds later. It was like he was just going to keep calling me and calling me. Finally, I got up and went to the phone. As it was ringing again, I decided to answer it. When I did, I heard nothing at first. Then I said, "Hello?" Then I heard the man again. He said, "I think I have the wrong number." It was too creepy. I instantly hung up the phone. Then I unplugged it from the wall and took the phone jack out as well. That made it finally stop. I was so freaked out that it took me almost an hour to fall back asleep. The next day, I was still thinking about how crazy that was. I left my phone unplugged for over a week. Since then, I've put it back in, and I have not received any more crazy calls like that. I still wonder who did that and why. Maybe it was just a prank, but whoever did that really went to great lengths if that's the case. I mean, to call that many times, never laugh, and to do it after 2 a.m. when I wasn't answering is pretty crazy, And I also have no idea who could have possibly done that or why they would have pulled a prank like that on me. I'm just hoping that that guy never calls me again.
This is something that happened back when I was about 10 or 12 years old. I'm an adult now, so it was a long time ago, but I still think about it sometimes. That's how weird and scary this situation actually was. To start out, I will mention that this was sometime in the early 2000s. Cell phones weren't as common back then, but my parents did have them. It was more common though for us to use our home phone, which was connected through our house. I think we had 2 or 3 of them. The main one was in the kitchen and there was another in the living room. We didn't have any caller ID, so when a phone call came in, you didn't know who it was unless you answered it. I was an only child, so I didn't have any siblings. One night, my parents left to go shopping, and I stayed home because I wasn't interested in going that night. I would go with them about half the time, but most of the time it was really boring. My parents would leave me home by myself all the time for small trips like that, and I was used to it. So that night, probably an hour after my parents left, I was in the kitchen and the phone rang. I figured that it was probably my parents calling, so I picked up the phone and answered it. After I said hello, I expected to hear my mom's voice, but I didn't. It was a man's voice, which sounded really weird. It definitely wasn't my dad either. The man on the other end spoke very slowly and asked me who I was. I was kind of creeped out a little bit, but I just figured the person was probably calling for one of my parents. Because I was so caught off guard though, I couldn't think of anything to say. I ended up just hanging up the phone right then and there. Afterwards, I went back to whatever I was doing. I don't remember a whole lot the rest of the time that my parents were gone that night. I know that when they came home, that guy didn't call back or anything. But only a few days later, the guy called back again. This time, my parents had already gone to bed, and I was up late watching TV in the living room. It was a Friday night, so I didn't have school and could stay up late. I'm guessing that it was like 11 p.m. or so. When I heard the phone ringing, it was really strange. There was usually never phone calls this late at night. I wondered who it could possibly be, but I had no intentions of answering it. I wasn't the type of person to just answer the phone unless my parents were gone or I was expecting a call. I let it ring as I continued watching TV and sitting on the couch. The living room phone was just a little ways away from me. After the phone stopped ringing, I heard a beep, and then could tell that somebody was going to leave a message. When somebody left a voicemail, you could hear it in live time. When I heard the person start to speak again, I instantly felt sort of creeped out. It was the same man speaking in a deep and slow voice just as he had before. He said something like, "Hi, I thought you were home tonight." There was a little pause before he hung up. I wondered who this guy was. Sure, I didn't know all the people that my parents did, but I was really close with my parents. If they had talked with this guy on the phone before in the past, I feel like I would have known. And why was he calling so late at night? I went to the phone, which now had the flashing light that there was a new message. I played it back just to hear it again. It was certainly really strange. I only stayed up for a little bit longer that night before going to bed. The next day, I forgot to tell my parents about the strange phone call, just as I had the other day as well. But later that night, we were all at home and in the living room when the phone rang. It was kind of late again this time, probably after 8 p.m. or so. My mom walked over and answered the phone. I really didn't think much of it, until my mom hung up the phone a very short time later without really saying anything. She said that when she answered the phone, she heard nothing, and then whoever was on the other end just hung up. My dad said that it was probably a wrong number, but then I remembered the strange phone calls, and I told my parents about them. They said they were unaware of who that could be. We played the message from the previous night, and we all found it very weird. The best guess was that it was somebody who had the wrong number or was just a prankster. That night, we didn't get any other calls. We didn't get any for about a week. In that time, I basically forgot about it. But then one night, I was home by myself again. I think my parents were out shopping again, but I don't remember exactly where they were. It was dark out, and I was in the living room when the phone rang. Thinking that it was my parents, I answered it, but it wasn't. I heard the man's voice again. He started to speak, but I immediately hung up on him. I was too creeped out to listen to whatever he had to say. but just moments later, the phone rang again. I just knew that it was probably him calling back. On the slim chance that it was my parents, they could leave a message. When the phone stopped ringing, I heard that whoever it was going to leave a message. When the message started, I heard the man's voice again. He said that he could see that I was home right now. This was really weird. Could he really? How did he know that I was home? I went over to the window and opened up the curtains a little bit, looking out to the street. I saw that there was a car parked on the side of the street just a little ways back of our house. It was unusual to have any cars parked on the side of our street. I couldn't tell who was inside or anything, but the engine was on and the car was running. I watched it for like 10 or 15 seconds and it didn't move. This was possibly the man. After seeing this, I ran to the phone and called my mom on her cell phone. I told her what was happening, and she said that they would head home immediately. I was too afraid to look out the window again, and I hid behind the couch until my parents got back home. They arrived maybe 10 minutes later, and when they did, they said that the car was not in the street. I'm not sure where that guy went, but I was happy that he was gone. After this happened, my parents didn't leave me home alone for a long time. Everywhere they went, they insisted that I came with. We also unplugged our home phone for probably about a month. When we finally hooked it back up, whoever that guy was didn't call again. I don't know for sure if that was actually him parked on the side of the street, but I have a feeling that it was. I also don't know who that guy was or why he kept calling us.
This happened when I was a teenager, many years ago. I was with my best friend Tony, and we were at my house. My parents were gone someplace, I don't remember where. Tony and I had been best friends for many years, and were like brothers. We liked to prank our friends a lot, and things like that. On this night that we were hanging out, Tony had the idea to prank phone call one of our friends. This was back before everybody had smartphones. Cell phones were around, but didn't have the capabilities that they do today. So we were going to call our friend Adam, and Tony had a whole joke that he was going to say to him. I don't remember exactly what it was, but it was probably really stupid. So we dialed Adam's number on one of the home phones at my house. It rang a few times, and then who we thought was Adam picked up. Tony started going into his joke and wasn't stopping. After he had spoke for like a minute straight, the person on the other end spoke. It was a man, but not Adam. It sounded like an adult, and I think we were about 14. The guy was really mad. I don't recall exactly what he said, but he was asking us who was calling and what was wrong with us and things like that. When we realized that it wasn't Adam, we were both surprised and also embarrassed. Tony just hung up the phone when the guy was still talking. Then we had a good laugh about it, but we decided not to call Adam anymore. That was enough prank phone calls for us. Instead, we decided to play video games. Just moments after hanging up though, the phone started ringing. We did not have caller ID, so I answered it not knowing who was calling us, although I think we both had a feeling that it might be the guy who we had just accidentally dialed. I picked up the phone and answered. I heard the same guy speaking, and he still sounded angry. I hung up on him, and then he called again right after. This time though, we did not answer the phone. We started playing video games at that point, and over the next 30 minutes or so, the guy called back several more times. At least we assumed that it was him. But each time, we didn't answer and just let it ring. Then, finally, we didn't get any more calls. We continued to game until probably about an hour after the call. That's when there was a knock at the front door. I was confused when I heard it. I lived in a pretty typical neighborhood, but knocks on the door at night were very unusual. We were in my bedroom, and I left the room and walked out into the living room. I got over to the front door and looked out of the window. Some guy was standing there who I didn't know. He looked right at me as I was looking at him. I moved away from the door and he knocked again. I went back to my room and told Tony that some guy was there. Then the phone rang again. We were both wondering if there was any possibility that it could be the same guy, so we answered the phone call this time. The man spoke, and he told us to come outside. When I heard that, I instantly hung up the phone again. Now the man must have been calling from his cell phone. He knocked on the door again, and we both went out into the living room. We heard him yell for us to come outside. The guy appeared to be in his 50s maybe, and was wearing a baseball cap and a jacket. That's all I remember about him.
We didn't answer the door though. He stayed there for several more minutes before finally leaving. After that, Tony and I were just waiting for the phone to ring again or for the guy to come back, but thankfully he never did. After that, we never prank phone called anybody else. I think the guy that we called must have had caller ID. He could have looked up our address by finding it in the phone book or something. I really don't know, but that's my best guess. It still creeps me out that he actually showed up at my house.
The story takes place a long time ago. It wasn't before cell phones, but it was before cell phones were an everyday thing. I mostly just used my home phone, and there was speed dial, but more times than not, you would have to dial the whole number every time you wanted to call somebody. Well, the story was on a Friday night, and I was home with my sister. We were both in high school at the time, and our parents were gone for the night with friends. We always liked to order pizza when our parents were gone, and there was this one spot in particular that was our favorite. My sister asked me to call, and I dialed the number. Apparently, when I was dialing though, I messed something up, but I didn't realize it. A male's voice answered, saying, "Hello?" He sounded kind of confused, like he was wondering why I called. It seemed odd, but I said that I was calling to order a pizza. The guy responded saying, "Okay." I went ahead with my order of a large pepperoni pizza. The guy just said, "Okay, what's your address?" I gave him my address, and he then said okay. It was kind of awkward, but we then said bye and hung up. My sister and I went into the living room and started watching TV, waiting for the pizza to get there. We had the money and tip on the counter waiting as well. About 20 minutes went by. We were getting really hungry and hoping that the pizza would be there soon. I happened to go over and look out the window, just out of curiosity. Then I saw a car coming down the street, very slowly. When I saw it come to a stop in front of our house, I told my sister that the pizza was here. She got excited and ran to get the money. I expected the car to pull into our driveway, but it drove a little bit past our house. I also noticed that there was no pizza delivery thing on top of the car. "Wait," I told my sister. The car then parked on the side of the road a little ways in front of our house. I watched the driver's door open and a man walk out. He began walking in the direction of our house, but he wasn't holding a pizza. I asked my sister to come and look, and she joined me at the window. We both watched the man walk into our front yard towards our front door. When he got closer, we both noticed that he was wearing a ski mask. When we noticed that detail, we ducked down at almost the exact same time. I was wondering what was going on. About 5 seconds later, there was a knock at the front door. My sister and I were whispering to each other, wondering who this guy was. After a few seconds of us not answering the door, he knocked again. Then, we heard a voice say, "Pizza delivery." We knew this was clearly not a pizza delivery. We were not going to answer. About 30 seconds went by with nothing. Then, he knocked again and said, even louder than before, "I'm the pizza guy with your pizza." He then knocked once more and said, "Open up." We were not going to, and we tried to be as quiet as we could. My sister and I were literally laying on the carpeted floor of our living room, trying not to make a sound. After maybe 2 or 3 minutes, he knocked again. Then, finally, we heard him walking away. I quietly went back to the couch and peeked out the window very carefully. I saw the man get back into his car and drive away. After my sister and I discussed what on earth just happened for a while, we decided to call the pizza place again. This time, we got the number correct, and we realized what had happened. We ordered the pizza for real and got it a short time later. I'm not sure what number exactly I called the first time, but whoever I called decided to pretend to be a pizza delivery man with a ski mask on. To this day, I still wonder what his intentions were. What would have happened if my sister or I opened the front door? I'm really glad that we didn't. Last year, I had a pretty creepy experience involving a wrong number, or at least that's what I thought it was. Randomly one time, I got a text from a number that I didn't know simply saying, "Hey." I wasn't sure who it was, so I said, "Hey, who's this? I don't have this number saved." The person responded saying, "Hey Mark, meet me." My name is not Mark, so I knew that it was a wrong number. I responded saying that I was not Mark and they must have the wrong number. Very soon after, I got another text. They said, "Okay, who are you?" I realized then that it was probably a scam and they were trying to get my information. I heard about some of these sort of text scams and had gotten one once before. Most of the time, if somebody actually has the wrong number, they will just say, "My bad, wrong number," and then not text again.
They wouldn't be very interested in you, but only interested in the actual number they're trying to reach. So when they asked who I was, I didn't respond. But surprising to me, they texted again a while later. This time they texted saying, "Answer me." This was strange, but I still thought that it was a scam. I responded and said, "I'm not falling for your scam." I thought then that they wouldn't respond to me, but I was wrong. Just moments after I sent the text, they tried FaceTiming me. At first, I didn't answer it. I thought that it was too weird, and I was not expecting it at all. But after I didn't pick up, they tried to FaceTime me once more. This time I was curious, so I decided to answer. When I did, it was hard to see at first who was on the other end. But after looking, it appeared to be somebody who was in a very dark, unfinished basement. I couldn't make out the details of their face because it was too dark and sort of blurry. The quality wasn't the greatest either, but I could tell that it appeared to be a man, and he started talking in an extremely deep voice. The voice did not sound natural, like he was trying to fake it. As he spoke, I couldn't make out any of the words that he was saying either. He was sort of mumbling, and it didn't make any sense. I said nothing because I had no idea what to possibly say. I just sat there watching him in shock. He continued to move around the dark basement and ramble incoherently in that creepy deep voice. He went on for about a minute or two, and I couldn't take it anymore. I ended the call, and then I blocked the number right then and there. It was really strange. After that, I didn't get any other weird texts or calls. Looking back at it now, I still have no clue who that was. I'm not sure why they texted me or called me. It was not the scam like I thought it was. But what was it? I'm still trying to figure that out.
Back in the year 2000, I used to work at a Blockbuster video store. I worked there for almost a whole year. I liked working there because I've always loved movies, and back then it was a fun place to be. My coworkers were mostly cool as well, and the store I worked at was right in town. I didn't live that far away. Mostly, I would work shifts that went from the afternoon until close. Our store closed at 10 p.m., and usually the last few hours would be really slow. I just remember a lot of good times of joking around with coworkers and learning about lots of new movies. One night working there, I had a closing shift. It got to be about 8 p.m., and it was just me and another coworker. The store got much more quiet, and there would only be a few customers here and there. I was working the cash register, and my coworker was working out in the store, or mostly in the back. Once it got to be about 9 o'clock on this night, the store was empty. I remember that it was then that the phone rang in the store up by me. I picked it up and answered the phone. We would get phone calls all the time of people asking questions if we had a certain movie or whatever. But like customers, there were less calls late at night. After picking up the phone, at first there was silence. I said hello for a second time. Then I heard this gravelly man's voice say, "I'm coming to get you." I was confused and said something like, "What's that?" He said again, "I'm coming to get you, Blockbuster." Then he started laughing this creepy laugh, and before I had a chance to say anything else, he hung up. Now, I assumed that it was more than likely a prank phone call. Prank calls were pretty popular back then, not necessarily to our store, but in general. Less people had caller ID and less people had texting, so prank calls were just more of a thing. And we did get prank calls from time to time at our store. I personally had only had one sort of prank call to that point, but I had heard of other ones. Mostly it would just be people making dumb jokes and then hanging up, but never anything creepy like this. I wasn't sure whether I should take it serious or not. I wrote it off as a joke, but I couldn't help but feel kind of paranoid. The store was empty and my coworker was in a back room at the moment, so it was like I was all alone in there. During that 9 o'clock hour, not long after the phone call, I saw out the window a car pull up to the parking lot. It parked and then a man got out and walked to the doors. Instantly I was nervous that perhaps this was the person who called. He had said he was coming to get me after all. The man entered the store and then walked into an aisle and began looking around. He looked like a pretty average guy. Nothing stood out about him. I didn't want to stare at him, but I was keeping my eyes in his direction. Soon though, within probably 5 minutes, he grabbed a movie and then headed up to the front. He came up to me and checked out. The guy was friendly, and I didn't think this was the man who called. He then left the store and drove away. I felt relieved. Then another customer came in minutes later. This time it was a woman, and I was pretty sure that she had nothing to do with the phone call either. She came in, looked around, and got a couple of movies, and I helped her check out, then she left. By now it was about 9:30. We didn't get any customers for about 10 minutes. At roughly 9:40, I would say, Another car pulled into the parking lot. Once more, I was nervous, but I was just more nervous this time for whatever reason. It was this older beat-up looking four-door sedan. It parked, and soon after, the driver's door opened and a man got out. He was fairly young, about average size, and had a hat and glasses as well as a beard. He walked up to the doors and entered the store. When he got inside, he glanced over at me and then continued. He went down an aisle and looked around for a little bit. I kept an eye on him, and quickly he walked up and down just about every aisle of the store. He didn't really seem to be looking at movies much anymore. After that, he walked back towards the front and headed towards me. When he got closer, he gave me this creepy sort of smirk, and it sent a shiver down my spine. The guy did not approach me though, and instead walked to the doors and left without buying anything. I was once again very relieved that he was gone, but when he left the store, he went out to his car in the parking lot and unlocked it, but did not get in the driver's seat. Instead, he opened up the back door, which was on the other side of the car from me. I got a bad feeling and just left my area and speed walked over to the doors. Then I locked them. It was only about 9:45 p.m., but I didn't care. As I was finishing up locking the doors, the man pulled out this backpack from his car and then started walking to the store again. I ran away from the door and then turned out the lights to the place. The man tried entering, but the doors were obviously now locked. My coworker came out from the back, noticing that I had turned the lights off. She asked me why I was closing early. I told her about the guy. I went with her to the back end of the store. Meanwhile, the creepy guy knocked on the door again and again. He remained there for like 5 minutes. As this was going on, I told my coworker the story, and she questioned if I knew for a fact that this was the guy who had called, and how I knew he was up to no good. She seemed a little bit skeptical and thought that I might be overreacting, and I did not know for a fact 100%, but my instincts told me that it was the guy. I felt that it was better to be safe than sorry. The man then started loudly banging on the glass. He stayed there for a couple more minutes, and I think at that point my coworker was convinced that this might be the guy. Finally, after a while, we stopped hearing him. I went back to the front of the store and saw that he was now finally gone. His car was gone too. I decided to keep the store closed, as it was now like 9:50 something anyways. Then, minutes later, there was another call on the store phone. I answered it, and it was the same guy with the gravelly voice. He said, "Why did you lock me out?" I was too scared to speak. The guy then started laughing his creepy laugh. The only thing I thought to say was, "I called the cops," even though I hadn't. He continued laughing and then hung up. After that, my coworker and I quickly finished our tasks and then left the store. I was really nervous leaving and sprinted out to my car. Thankfully, we both made it back safe. I didn't work for a few nights after that. I just had them off, and when I returned to work, things were fine. I never dealt with that guy again, so I'm not sure exactly what the situation was there. Was it a prank? What was in his backpack? And what was his plan? I'm really not sure, but I'm glad that I locked the doors when I did.
A few years back, I got a new phone, with a new number and everything. When I did, I called my best friend, and was pretty sure that I knew her number and had it memorized. Calling her was just about the first thing that I did when I got my new phone. Right when I heard her pick up the phone, I said hi, but the person on the other end was a man. I didn't recognize the voice either. I asked if this was my friend's number, and the person said no. I realized I probably had the wrong number, and I told them that. But the guy said something like, "No, who is this calling?" I just said sorry again and then hung up. I looked back to the number that I had dialed and realized that it was in fact wrong. I had mixed up one of the numbers, but everything else was correct. Then I called my friend, but as I was talking to her, I got a call from another number. It was the first guy who I had called accidentally, and he was calling back. I ignored it and talked to my friend for about 10 minutes or so. The guy tried calling 2 more times during the call. Then, later that day, he tried calling me probably 5 more times at least. I ignored all of them, but he just wouldn't stop. He kept calling, so finally I answered it. The man on the other end acted like he hadn't been blowing up my phone all day and night. He casually asked me what was going on and how I was doing. I asked him why he kept calling me, and he flat out ignored the question. I got mad and hung up on him after that. Then I blocked his number. Now I wouldn't have to worry about this guy contacting me again. Or so I thought. Just the next day, I got a text from a new number. It said, "Why did you block me?" I asked who it was, but I really didn't need to. Obviously, I knew who it was. It was the guy that kept calling me. He probably just made an account on one of those free text and call apps or whatever. He texted me back, confirming what I knew, but I just went ahead and blocked this number. This didn't stop him, though. Whoever this guy was, he was very determined. A new number started calling me repeatedly later that day. I couldn't believe that this guy was still trying to contact me. He just wouldn't give up. I texted this number, asking him to stop harassing me, but he didn't. Each time that I would block the number, a new one would appear. He would call me about 10 times a day and just wouldn't leave me alone. This went on for more than an entire week. I decided then that I was just going to get a new number. I had only had my number for about a week, and this guy would not leave me alone. After I was able to change numbers again, I was finally left alone. That guy probably kept calling and texting my old number. If somebody else got it, I feel sorry for them. But when the guy found out it wasn't me, hopefully he left them alone. I still can't believe the efforts he went through to get to me, though. I'm glad it didn't get worse.
About 10 years ago, I received a picture from a random number. It was a normal afternoon, and I was scrolling through my phone when a notification popped up. I didn't recognize the number, but curiosity got the better of me. I opened the message, and I was taken aback by what I saw. It was a selfie of a woman in her bra and underwear, taking a picture in front of a mirror. The woman looked almost identical to my girlfriend, who is now my wife. At first glance, I even thought it was her, but after closer examination, it wasn't. The girl in the picture had the same long hair and similar facial features. The resemblance was uncanny, but I noticed tiny differences, like her lips were slightly fuller, and her hair had a slightly different shade, but still very minor differences. I stared at the image for a long time, trying to convince myself that it was just a strange coincidence. I couldn't shake the feeling that this was something more than just a random picture, and I decided to ask my girlfriend about it. We were sitting on the couch one evening, and I showed her the text that I had received. I explained the situation, showing her the picture on my phone. She examined it closely and stated that it was creepy and it was not her in the picture. Then she pulled out her own phone to show me something. She opened a message from a similar number which was one digit off from the one that had messaged me. My heart sank when she turned the screen toward me. It was a selfie of a guy in nothing but his underwear, taking a picture in front of a mirror. The guy looked almost exactly like me. Same build, same hair color, even the same slight stubble that I often had. We contemplated how this was even possible. The odds of both of us receiving nearly identical pictures from numbers that were so close seemed impossible. It was unsettling to think that there were people out there using our images, or at least images of our doppelgangers. We tried calling the numbers, hoping to get some answers. Each time, we were met with silence. No one picked up, and no one returned our texts. It was like those numbers didn't exist, or that they were intentionally avoiding us. As days turned into weeks, the incident lingered in my mind. I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched or targeted in some bizarre game. I even began to wonder if there was some connection between the woman in the picture and my girlfriend. Finally, I decided to take some sort of action to try to find out anything about the numbers. I went on social media and searched for the numbers, hoping to find anything that would explain what happened, but there were no leads. Just when I finally accepted that maybe it was just a prank, I received another message from the same number who had sent me the original picture. My heart raced as I opened it, bracing myself for something disturbing. Instead, it was a simple text message that said, "Stop looking." I was freaked out. Who were these people, and how did they know what I was doing? I never replied. Instead, I showed my girlfriend the message, and we decided to both block the numbers. We tried to put it behind us, but the strangeness of it has stayed with me to this day. This happened a couple of weeks ago. I was up late at night and couldn't sleep. I live in a small apartment, and it's not the nicest. It's cheap though, and near where I go to school. I live by myself and on the upper level, with my front door opening to an outdoor walkway right next to the stairs that go down towards the parking lot. Like I said, I couldn't sleep, so I was on my phone with the TV on in the background in my bedroom. It was like 3 o'clock in the morning, and as I was on my phone, I saw a call come across my screen. It startled me because of how late it was. The number was not one that I recognized, but it did say that it was in the same city that I was in. Not knowing who this was, I didn't answer though. I thought maybe that was the end of that, but about a minute later, they called again. I was curious, so I decided to answer. I heard a voice start speaking to me in a whisper. At first, I couldn't understand anything that they were saying, and I asked who it was. I then heard them whisper to me, asking why I was up so late. I could tell it was a man, but beyond that, I had no idea who it was. He then said how he had been watching me. I got up and looked out the back window. It overlooked the parking lot behind the apartments, with the woods just beyond that. It was pitch black outside, and the guy could be anywhere. As I walked closer to the window, I heard him start to laugh on the other end. I closed the blinds and then backed away. I left my bedroom and went out into the living room. I couldn't take it anymore, and I hung up on the guy. Obviously, I had no idea who he was, but I didn't care to find out either. I then started hearing the sound of footsteps coming up the stairs outside of my apartment. With mine being the first one next to the stairs, I always heard when people came up, because the walls were pretty thin. I ran over to my front window and scrambled to close those blinds as fast as I could. I was just able to get them shut on time before I heard whoever was there reach the top of the steps. Then I didn't hear anything. I thought maybe they would walk past towards the other 3 apartments that were up there, but I never heard them. I sat there unable to focus on anything else for several minutes. I was convinced whoever walked up the steps was the same guy that had called me. However, without me hearing any more noises, I thought maybe he had left. I wanted to go to sleep, but I was too scared, so I decided to take a look outside to make sure the coast was clear, and hopefully then I could relax. I lifted up the window shades and looked out. As soon as I did, I saw a really creepy looking guy with his face pressed up against the window, smiling at me. I jumped back and screamed. I heard him laughing from the other side of the window. I screamed to him that I was calling the police, and I then heard him start to run away. He ran back down the stairs, and from there, he was gone. It took me forever to fall asleep after that. I was paranoid that I would see the man again. I was even paranoid for several days after that. But the crazy thing is, I haven't seen him or heard from him since, and I hope I never do again. This took place back in the early 2000s. I'm a female and lived alone in my apartment at the time. I was home by myself one night and received a phone call. I picked it up and answered, but at first didn't hear anything on the other end. I asked if anybody was there, and for a couple of seconds there was still nothing. Then finally a man spoke. I did not recognize the voice as anybody that I knew. He said that he must have the wrong number, and then he hung up. After that, I didn't think much of it. Occasionally phone calls for the wrong number were made. It was certainly a lot more common than it is nowadays. So a few days went by, and then once more, I received a call late at night. I picked up the phone saying hello, and I heard nothing. I said hello several more times. Nobody spoke on the other end at all, and I was then hung up on by whoever had called me. The very next night after that, it happened again. By now, I was getting really suspicious. I didn't know what was going on, but it was strange that it kept happening. They would call, and I would answer, and then they wouldn't say anything. It always seemed to happen later at night. It was honestly creeping me out, and I was wondering what was going on. I didn't get any more calls for the rest of that night, though. The next strange thing to happen was not a phone call. I left for work the next morning after the previous call. My drive to work usually took about 15 minutes. Now, I was followed the entire way there. I know that because the street that my apartment was on was really quiet. The next few streets that I would drive on were also usually quiet. So I noticed a car driving behind me, although I couldn't tell who was driving the car. When I got to the highway, I sort of forgot about it and figured that it wasn't going to follow me anymore. The highway had a lot more vehicles on it. I thought maybe it was a coincidence to that point. When I took my exit for work, I noticed the car taking the exit behind me. I drove down a couple more streets, and the car did the same. This had never happened before, and I had a really strong feeling that they were following me intentionally. Now I was getting worried.
but literally right before my turn for work, the car went in another direction. I really didn't know what to think about it. After work that night, I drove back home and wasn't followed. That night, I didn't get any phone calls, but the very next night after that, I did. This time, I remember that it was probably about 11 o'clock. The phone rang, and I walked over and picked it up. After answering, I heard a man's voice. He told me that he was my neighbor down the hallway and asked if I could come over real quick. He said he needed some help. Something about it just seemed fishy. I thought that I recognized the voice, but not as a neighbor. And also, I was pretty sure that whoever this was supposed to be did not have my telephone number. I went to the door and looked through my peephole out of curiosity. When I did, I saw a man standing right there on the other side. I was not sure who he was, but I did think he was probably the one behind the strange occurrences. So instead, I dialed 911 and told the police that there was a suspicious man at my apartment. I then got another call from the guy claiming to be my neighbor. I answered it, asking who this neighbor was. He made up some name like Steve or something, I remember. He just kept telling me to come out of my apartment and that it was urgent. I went back over to the door and looked out, and the guy was still there. I told him that I called the cops. When I said this, I watched him turn and then walk away. After that, he didn't come back. The police got there a little while later, and I told them everything that the man had done. Unfortunately, there was not a lot that they could do about it. I decided to change my phone number, though. After that, I didn't receive any more calls. I also wasn't followed, and nobody came to my apartment, although I only lived in that apartment for about another month. I never found out who had done it or why. Every time the phone would ring late at night for months, I would worry that it was that man calling. I'm really glad that he didn't, though.
A crazy thing happened one time regarding a lockdown when I was in high school. It was during my junior year, I believe. So I remember that I was sitting in class one day. I don't remember a lot about the day prior to that, but I think that it had gone pretty normal. I do not recall anything strange or unusual happening. But when I was in class, all of a sudden there was a lockdown. The teacher stopped class, locked the doors, and turned out the lights. We were not told why there was a lockdown or what it was about. Some kids asked, but the teacher didn't say. So we all just had to sit there and wait in the dark. Some kids started talking, but we all kept our volumes of conversations pretty low. During this time, my cell phone started ringing. I looked and I did not recognize the number. Possibly from being bored during the lockdown, I decided to answer it. When I did, at first I heard nothing but static. My volume was also pretty low because I was in class, so it was hard to hear, but I had the phone up to my ear and I was listening. I asked who was calling me. Then I heard a man's voice. I don't remember his exact words, but he said something like, "I'm in your school and they're chasing me. I'm leaving now and I'm going to your house instead." I was so confused that I didn't even know what to say. After claiming he was going to my house, the phone hung up. I then put the phone down and it took me a minute to compute the conversation that I had just had. Finally, I started putting the pieces together. If this guy was in my school and they were chasing him, he was likely the reason that we were having a lockdown. But who was this guy and how did he get my number? And why did he say he was going to my house? Maybe he knew where I lived. I sat there thinking about the conversation for like 5 minutes. Finally, I decided to report it. I walked up to my teacher and told her what happened. She then called the principal's office. After that, I had to talk on the phone with someone from the principal's office briefly. Then the lockdown went for maybe 30 more minutes. When it was over, I didn't get a clear answer as to what was going on or anything. I just went on with the rest of the school day confused as can be. But I remember in my last class of the day, I got pulled out of it and told to go to the principal's office. Then they told me what happened. They said that a man was in the school who did not have any identification or reason for being there. He ran when questioned and the school was locked down. The police got called, but they couldn't find him in the building and thought that he had left. Then, after I reported the phone call, they went to my house. They found him hiding out on the edge of our property in the woods. We had a pretty big yard, and there was a lot of trees and woods back there. So the phone call that I got was from some creepy guy that was apparently stalking me or something. The crazy thing is I had no idea about the guy before this. I don't know how he got my number, how he knew where I lived, or anything. It really freaked me out when I realized that he probably followed me before without me noticing or something. I'm just glad that he was caught.
This happened a long time ago. Back then, I lived in an apartment by myself. This would have been sometime in the early 2000s. So I was trying to call my friend one night on the home phone in my apartment. I had her number written down and had almost memorized it. My phone was kind of old and I didn't have caller ID or many modern functions. That wasn't a big deal to me though. So anyways, as I was dialing my friend, I must have dialed the wrong number because when the call got picked up, I heard a man's voice. I knew that my friend lived alone like I did. Still, I asked if she was there, and the guy said that nobody by that name lived there. So I said that I was sorry and I must have dialed the wrong number. The man said he understood and it was okay. Then I hung up. I dialed again for my friend, and this time made sure to dial each number correctly. When the call went through, I got my friend and then I started talking to her. We were best friends and we talked on the phone almost every day, many times for hours. So when we were talking, I remember that I heard another call coming in, but I didn't bother to hang up and answer it. I talked with my friend for about an hour and then hung up. After that, it was sometime at night, maybe 9 o'clock or so. I got another call on my phone and picked it up. I heard a man on the other end and realized that it was the same guy who I had accidentally called earlier. He said hi and that he tried to call me before. I told him that the line had been busy. He said that after I called him, I sounded cute and asked if I wanted to go on a date with him sometime. He also said that based on my area code, he figured that we lived in the same city. I realized that the guy must have had caller ID. To me, this did not seem like a good idea. For one, his voice didn't sound very attractive to me, but also, for me being a young woman, I didn't think it was smart to go on a random blind date with a guy who I accidentally called the wrong number. I told him that I just didn't want to, and it was nothing personal, but I didn't know him. He tried to convince me, but I really didn't want to, and I was finding it to be increasingly awkward. Finally, the guy said he understood and then hung up. But apparently, he did not in fact understand, because he called me back like 10 minutes later. I answered because again, I didn't have caller ID, and I didn't know who it was that was calling me. When I answered the phone, he asked if I had changed my mind yet. I said no, it's been like 10 minutes. He said that he just thought he would ask, and I said, okay, goodbye now, and then I hung up the phone. Then I called my friend again, because I just had to tell her about the crazy thing that had happened. For the rest of the night, the man did not call. The next day, I was at work during the day like usual. I got back to my apartment and was having a normal night with no strange phone calls or anything. But at about 8 o'clock, there was a knock on my apartment door. I didn't know who it would be because I wasn't expecting anyone, and I wasn't thinking about the man in the moment who had called me previously. When I looked through the peephole, I saw a guy standing there. He just had a creepy look to him and gave me a bad feeling, and I'm not just saying that. I had not remembered the phone calls in that moment. I was about to answer the door when I saw the guy reach into his pocket. I was curious, so I kept watching. He took out a cell phone and then started dialing a number. Moments later, my phone rang. That's when I realized who it was. I walked over to my phone, and for some reason, I answered. The guy asked me if I was at home, and I said, "What's it to you?" The man told me to open my front door. That's when I knew for a fact who it was, and I told him to go away. He said that I should go out with him and give him a chance. I told him that if he didn't go away now, I was calling the cops. He got offended and then finally hung up the phone. I went to the peephole again thinking that he had left, but he hadn't. He was still there. Then he loudly banged on the door. I still didn't open it. He yelled at me, demanding that I let him in, but I still wouldn't do it. By this point, I was about to call the cops, but he finally turned and stormed off. That's when I looked out of the door again for a while and made sure that he had gone. And after he was out of sight, I looked out into the hallway just to make sure that he was actually gone. He was. I was extremely creeped out by the guy. I don't know how he knew exactly where I lived. I think that maybe he looked me up in the phone book. It was a very scary experience, though.
I was hanging out with a couple of friends one Friday night, and we were bored. We had heard about a prank phone number line online that claimed to connect you to a real-life ghost, so we decided to call it. I grabbed my phone, laughing as I dialed the number. After a few rings, a voice picked up. It was clearly a recording, full of static and eerie sounds. I played along, making silly comments and pretending to be scared. The whole thing lasted about 5 minutes and we hung up, thinking the whole thing was harmless. Later that week, things took a turn. I was at the grocery store picking up some essentials when my phone buzzed. I looked down and saw a text message from an unknown number. It was a photo of me standing in the snack aisle looking at chips. I looked around for my friends since I thought maybe it was a prank from one of them, but it didn't feel right. There was a message along with the photo that said, pay $5,000 to a specific Venmo account or else. I thought it was a joke, just another level of pranking, but the texts kept coming. Each day I would receive a new message with images of me doing ordinary things, such as working at my job, sitting on my couch, even walking my dog. Each photo came with a similar threat, basically saying to pay up or else. I had no idea who was behind this. I didn't share my location with anyone, and my social media accounts were private. After a few days of constant messages, I decided to tell my friends. When I showed them the texts, their expressions shifted from amusement to concern. My friend Jason even suggested that we go to the police, but I hesitated. I didn't want to sound paranoid or make it seem like I couldn't handle it. Finally, after I received another picture taken from behind my house saying that I had 1 week, I decided to bring it to the police. I gathered all the texts and screenshots and drove down to the station. I explained everything to an officer, who seemed to take it seriously, thankfully. The officer told me they'd investigate and to keep my phone close, not to engage with the sender, and to report any further messages. Days passed and I didn't receive any new texts. I thought maybe the police were making progress or whoever was behind it had gotten bored. But then, on the last day of the week, I got one final message. It was a video of me sitting in the living room, and then the camera flipped around, and it showed somebody with their face covered holding a knife. The text along with the video said that my time was running out. I called the police immediately. They assured me that they were still on the case and I should stay put, and they sent officers to my house and ensured my safety. The officers told me that they couldn't trace the number and believed it was a burner phone used specifically for harassment. They reassured me that they would keep looking into it and suggested that I stay vigilant. After that day, the messages stopped. I never heard from that number again. I have a feeling that it had to be related to the prank call phone number that we had used my phone to call. The thought of someone out there knowing my routine still gives me the chills. I hope they never come back.
I live in a fairly small and quiet town. I live by myself, a little bit out in the country. The story I'm about to tell you happened just a few months ago. One night, I was sleeping, but woke up at 2 o'clock in the morning. I remember that when I woke up, I heard my phone vibrating on the nightstand next to me. I ignored it and just tried to go back to sleep, but whoever was calling me called again. After probably the third or fourth call, I finally woke up completely. To that point, I had kind of been half awake, just wanting to go back to sleep. I hadn't really realized how strange it was to receive a random phone call at this hour. I looked at the phone and it simply said, "Unknown number" on the screen. This was also kind of odd. Now that I was awake, I could tell whoever it was really wanted me to answer, and I accepted the call. I said, "Hello?" but at first heard nothing on the other end. Then I heard the sound of a heavy and deliberate breathing. That was it. I asked multiple times who was calling, but all I got in response was the breathing noises. This had to be a joke. How else could I explain this? I was pretty sure that was the case. I mean, who calls up someone at 2 o'clock in the morning and just breathes on the other end? They probably found some way to not make their number show and were pulling a prank on me. I said something like, "Very funny," and then I hung up on them. Then I went back to sleep. They actually did not call me for the rest of the night, and I woke up the next morning for work at my normal time. It was about 7 a.m., and after getting up, I went into the kitchen. My kitchen is kind of at the front of the house. That's when I noticed something on my front window. There was like a post-it note, and it was sticking to the window, and I found this really odd. It hadn't been there the night before. It was in obvious view of me, and somebody had to have put it there recently. I walked outside and picked it off the window. There was writing in pen on the sticky note which said, "Call me back." I got the chills when I read it. I connected it to the call that I had gotten at 2 o'clock in the morning. This was really odd. Now, I don't just live in a city where there are tons of houses. Like I said, I'm a little more out in the countryside. The houses are spread very far apart. I can barely even see my neighbor's house when I'm in my driveway. My driveway is also really long. For somebody to be on my property, which has multiple no trespassing signs on it, this was really strange. I went to the police that day about it, just letting them know. I didn't really feel like I was in danger, but I thought I would let them know about the situation because of how strange it was. It's a quiet town, and these things don't happen very often. Now, it very well could have been some guy in the neighborhood pulling a prank, but I've never had any pranks pulled on me like that before. I couldn't really think of anybody who would do something like that to me either. Today, it remains a mystery, and I haven't had any strange phone calls since.
I live near the Appalachian Mountains and have lived here for a long time. It's kind of a wild area where I am. There's lots of woods, hills, and wildlife around here. My house is in a quiet and spread out neighborhood. Most people have pretty big sized yards and there's a lot of animals. I have a backyard that goes about an acre back and then there's a very large woods past it. My property goes back about another acre of woods before it ends. But there are only a few markers in the ground at the boundary and I rarely go out there. It's a very dense forest and it connects to a park. The overall woods seems to go on very far. So anyways, I was at home by myself one night and it was getting late. I heard a sound coming from my backyard. This was because I had one of the windows slightly open in the kitchen for the breeze. When I heard the noise, it sounded like a bush moving, but not from the wind. There was no mistaking that something was walking past it and brushing against the bush, and I assumed that it was an animal. There are all kinds of animals in the woods back there, the most common being deer. So I walked over to the window and then looked out. By the time I got there, it had been about 10 seconds since the sound had happened, and when I arrived, I saw nothing. I looked around but did not see anything. A lot of views in the backyard were obstructed because the area had a few trees and bushes and stuff scattered around. Plus, I don't have much lights back there. It's mostly just dark when it's nighttime. I figured that the animal had run off, and so I just left the room. I was in the other room, and maybe 30 minutes after this, I heard another sound. This time, it sounded like a crash against the back sliding glass door. It was located on the edge of my kitchen, and it went out to the backyard. It sounded like someone or something had run right into it, or hit it with something very large. The sound was kind of like a thud. It surprised me, and I got up and then listened, but there weren't really any other sounds after that. I was confused, so I went over to the kitchen, but I could not see out there because the blinds were completely covering the window. I walked over to a different window nearby and looked out of that one. This time, when I did, I saw something. There was what appeared to be a man sprinting at about full speed through my backyard. He was headed away from the house and running towards the woods. I watched him run all the way to the woods and then disappear in them. I was really creeped out now. I went outside and took a few steps into the yard and looked around. The guy was gone now, deep into the woods. Nothing else seemed out of place or anything. That made me wonder if the noise that I had heard earlier was the man, and I concluded that it most likely was. Still, I had never had anything like that happen before, so I didn't know what the deal was. I went back inside, and for the next hour or so, nothing strange happened. Then, right before I was about to go to bed, I randomly got a call on my cell phone. It was from an unknown number. I was curious, so I decided to pick it up. When I did, at first I heard nothing. I asked who was calling me, and then, on the other side, I heard a sort of heavy breathing. It sounded like a man, but he never said anything. He just kept breathing heavily into the phone. I asked multiple times who was calling, but he didn't answer. Then, after like 30 seconds, he hung up on me. I was even more creeped out now. I made sure that every window and door was closed and locked. I even covered all the windows as well. There was no sign of the man or anybody when I went to sleep. The next day, things were fine. Nothing like that has happened since. I still wonder about it though. I figure the man calling me was the same guy running in my yard. It's too much of a coincidence for it not to be. But how did he get my number, and why? I hope that he does not come back. For a little bit of background, this happened to me in the 1990s.
During this time, I was a single female living by myself in a house. I worked a job that was in an office downtown. The company that I worked for back then was very large and had different offices in the city and around the country. One time, there was a big work party that was taking place at a hotel downtown. It was a pretty big deal, and hundreds of people from multiple offices were invited. When I was there, the first few hours of it were good. I was mingling with other coworkers and some of my friends from work. Towards the end of the night, though, I was planning on leaving soon, and a man approached me. I was standing off kind of to the side a little, and he walked right up and introduced himself. I had seen him earlier at the party, but I didn't recognize him, and he must have worked at another office. I don't remember what his name was, but he was clearly interested in me. But something about him did not sit right with me. He just seemed a little bit strange, and I was also not interested in him. We talked for a little bit, just basic conversation. He told me that he worked at another location and asked me how I liked my job and stuff. So at the end of the conversation, I said that I was planning on heading out. He asked me if I wanted to share a cab, and I told him no thanks and that I drove there. At that point, he asked me for my number before I left. This is something really stupid looking back, but back then when some guys would ask me for my number and I wasn't interested, I would give them a wrong number. It was much easier to do back then because not everyone had cell phones. I did have a cell phone, but I rarely used it. I would mostly just use my home phone because my cell phone was big and bulky. So I gave this guy a random wrong number. Then I shook his hand and walked away. After that, I stayed at the party for only 5 more minutes or so. I said bye to some of my work friends, and then I headed out. I left the hotel and went to my car parked on the street. Then I drove home. I lived only about 10 minutes away, and my house was right outside of the city. The neighborhood was very busy, and the houses were really close together. I went inside, and only about a minute later, there was a knock on my front door. By now, it was almost 11 o'clock at night, so I knew this was really strange. I walked over to the door and answered it, without even checking to see who was there. When I opened up the door, I saw the guy from the party. It was a shock to see him here. I asked him what he was doing, and he seemed pretty angry. He told me that he called my number and it belonged to a random guy who had no idea who I was. Then he said that he knew I gave him the wrong number and asked me why I did it. There wasn't much I could say. I just told him I wasn't interested, but that doesn't mean he could follow me home. He said a few more angry things to me and then started up towards my door. It looked like he was going to try to come inside of my house, and I quickly slammed the door shut. He caught it right before it closed though and tried to stop me. I had to practically throw my whole body up against the door to get it to shut. I was finally able to, and then I locked it. He tried opening the door several times and then started pounding on it. I yelled at him that I was going to call the police. At first, he kept banging on my door. I didn't think anything was going to stop him, and I went over to the phone. But finally, he stopped and then walked away. I watched him leave, and after that night, I never saw him again. I was worried that he would show up randomly sometime or something like that, but he didn't. This was the last time that I ever gave anybody the wrong number.
This happened just a few months ago. I used to drive to this local park to go jogging there literally every day. I would not always go at the same time, but I would always make sure that I went. Many times it would be in the dark. I didn't want to be jogging alone in the dark, but with my work schedule, sometimes that was the only time I could go. This park had a trail that looped around the entire place. There was a large open field, a spot with picnic tables and a playground, and then a wooded area. I would parallel park my car on this spot right between the wooded area and where it gets more open. The street that I would park on would always be really quiet. I arrived at the park one night like normal. Typically when I would jog, I would have my workout headphones in and play music on my phone. So on this occasion, I arrived at the park after dark and then set out on the trail to jog. It was a nice and calm night. Nobody else was out, and I was going to jog 2 laps around the entire trail. This would take me maybe 30 minutes or so. So when I was on my second lap, I was jogging through the wooded section of the path and had maybe 5 minutes to go. That's when my music stopped out of nowhere. I wondered why. So I took out my phone while still jogging but slowing down a little bit. I saw that I was getting a phone call, and then I stopped completely. When I looked at the number though, I didn't recognize it.
I ignored it and kept jogging. After the call was done ringing, my music went back to playing, and they didn't call again. I continued, and then I was done soon after, and I got back to my car and went home. Whoever had called did not leave any kind of message or anything. I didn't really give the call any more thought after that. But the following night, I was on a similar schedule. I went to the park at not the exact same time, but around probably the same time in general. I once more started jogging and was by myself. Now, when I was in around the same spot at the same time, my phone started ringing again. I could not believe it. To that point, I had forgotten about the phone call the previous day, but this obviously reminded me. I looked, and I couldn't say for sure if I recognized it as the same number as the night before, but it obviously was. I mean, that would just be too much of a coincidence for it not to be. I started to get this creeped out feeling, so I decided to answer the call. I pushed accept and then put the phone up to my ear and said hello. At first, there was nothing on the other end of the line. Then I heard a man's voice. He said, "I'm behind you." And that's all he said. I was standing there on the trail, stopped, and I asked who he was. He didn't answer. Then it clicked to me that maybe he was actually behind me, and I turned around. I didn't see anything though, but it was really dark out. I didn't want to take any chances. I stood there for maybe 10 seconds, then I quickly started sprinting the rest of the way, not jogging, but running as fast as I could. In this time, I didn't hear anything behind me. I still had my headphones in, but they were no longer playing music as I had paused it. I didn't look back because it would slow me down, and if I saw anything, it would really freak me out. I kept going, and what probably would have been 5 minutes of jogging turned into just a couple of minutes of sprinting. Then I ran out to my car in the street and got inside. Once I was finally there, I felt safe again and I locked my doors, and then I looked to the path before leaving. When I looked, I saw this man dressed in all black, including a ski mask, slightly emerge from the woods. He didn't come after me, but was just standing there looking in my direction. I was so creeped out. I quickly drove off and went home. I blocked the number, and I haven't been back to that park since.
This happened on Black Friday in 2004. It had been a great Thanksgiving, and I was hoping to have a great Black Friday with my wife. We got up early to go Black Friday shopping at all the stores. First, we went to Walmart, and things got off to an interesting start. We got there shortly after they opened, which was around 6 a.m. I think. There were some things that we were hoping to get, but I wasn't depending on it. I knew that things can get crazy, so if we missed out, it wasn't a big deal. Obviously, the store was busy. My wife and I tried to go through the large crowd towards electronics, where all the action was. Most people were there trying to get some type of TV, video game, phone, or computer, and I was no different. I was hoping for a new TV, and so we walked back there as fast as we could. By the time we got there, the scene was even crazier than I expected, and I had expected it to be wild. There were people everywhere, and some were actually fighting over stuff. I went over to the TVs with my wife. I saw that there were a couple left of the kind that I wanted. As I was walking over, I saw somebody grab one. Now there was just one left. I hurried to go faster now, and I heard my wife say, "Go for it." So I did not run, but I speed walked over to the last television set. When I got there, I was just about to reach out and grab it when this guy came flying in out of nowhere. He ran into me and completely knocked me over onto the ground because he hit me at an angle where I didn't see him at all. Because I had not seen him coming, I fell and the man tripped over me, and then he fell to the ground as well. We were both on the ground and the guy quickly got up. But when he did, I guess someone else took the last TV. I had no idea because I didn't see it as I was still on the floor. The next thing I knew, my wife came over to me and asked if I was okay. I was fine, and I stood back up. All of a sudden, the guy came back over to me who had ran into me and got in my face. He said that I had tripped him. I told him that I never saw him coming and said that he knocked me over. He said that because of me, he didn't get the last TV. I asked him where it went, and he said some other guy took it. This angered me because I had wanted it too, but I also knew that it wasn't my fault. I said he shouldn't have ran me over, and I was glad that he didn't get the TV. Well, that really ticked the guy off, and he started cursing at me. My wife said we should go, sensing things were heating up in the argument. I decided that it would be best to just back away, so I turned and left. The man wasn't happy with this though. He started to follow us, still cursing at me. I wanted badly to turn around and punch him in the face, but I knew that that would only make things worse, so I just ignored him. Eventually, we were able to get away from him and blend back in with the crowd. We shopped around the store and soon found some other things to buy. After being in the store for a while, my wife and I went up and checked out. Then we left and headed to another store. I remember that several hours later we were at this type of furniture store. My wife and I were looking at the items when my cell phone rang. I didn't have caller ID, as cell phones were much different back then. I answered it and heard somebody who I didn't immediately recognize. It was a man, and he was very angry. Soon, though, I realized that it was the same guy who I had gotten into it with at Walmart. This blew my mind, as I had no idea how he got my phone number. He was just harassing me and cursing at me more. He said that he wanted to talk to me and asked me where I was. I told him to leave me alone, and he asked me when I was going home. He then said that he was going to get me back. But right in the middle of him saying that, I hung up the phone. He immediately tried calling me again, but I didn't answer. He kept trying to call, I'm sure, because my phone kept ringing, so I just turned it off. I kept wondering how he got my number, though. My wife and I continued shopping. Eventually, we were done for the day and went back home. Things were good then, and I turned my phone back on. The guy didn't call. However, that night, when it was pretty late, there was a knock on our front door. This seemed odd right away, but I didn't know who it was. I went to a window and looked out and saw that same guy. He started loudly banging on the door and yelling at me to answer. Then he tried opening it a few times. I didn't know what this guy was capable of. But now that he was at my house, I wasn't going to back down. I went over to the front door against my wife's wishes and stormed out. I started yelling at the guy to get off my property, and he was still cursing at me. Instantly, when I got in his face, he took a swing at me and partly hit me. I shoved him back, and he tried to push me to the ground. I ran towards him and tackled him, and we both went down. Then we were just kind of rolling around swinging at each other for a while. Eventually, the guy pulled himself away and got up. I got up as well and thought that we were going for round 2, but instead the guy walked off to his car in the street and then left. We didn't call the cops or anything, and he was gone. Then I went inside, and my wife showed me how to block his phone number. After that, I never heard from him or saw him again. It was a crazy thing. I still don't know how he got my number or how he got my address. It's possible that he followed me, but I hadn't noticed. Because when I checked out at Walmart, I do think I gave them my phone number. But then again, the guy would have had to be within feet of us, and he also would have had to follow us to get to our house. The store was busy, but I think I would have noticed. It remains a mystery to me to this day.
It started one Saturday afternoon when I was sitting in my living room, scrolling through social media. I switched to a new phone and a new number a few months ago. My old number was still active, but I didn't think much of it because it had been quiet. Suddenly, my phone buzzed, and when I looked down, I saw it was a text from my old number. The message read, "I see you." It was odd because I thought it was just some spam or a wrong number, so I shrugged it off. A few hours later, another message came through saying, "You don't remember me?" I had forgotten to change my number on a few accounts, so it was possible that somebody had gotten a hold of it. I decided to reply, trying to keep it light, and I typed back, "Who is this?" The response was quick and said, "You know who I am." I didn't want to engage further, so I put my phone down and tried to watch a movie, but the messages nagged at the back of my mind. The next day, the text continued, saying more creepy and odd things. I stopped replying for a while. Monday brought more messages, saying things such as, "I'm closer than you think," and "You'll remember me soon." I debated calling the police, but what would I even say? Somebody is texting me creepy things from my old number? It felt ridiculous. By Tuesday, I was on edge, and I couldn't focus at work. The messages were escalating, saying, "I know what you did last summer," and kept repeating, "You'll remember soon." I tried to block the number, but it kept coming through, so I finally decided to involve the police and see if they could do anything. I explained the situation, and they filed a report. The messages continued for all the next week, and I tried to ignore them as best as I could. I finally got a call from the police a week later. They had traced the text back to an old acquaintance from high school, someone I hadn't spoken to in years. He had been using some sort of app to send the messages from my old number. That night, I confronted him at his house, and his parents answered the door, so it ended up working out perfectly to involve them as well. It was awesome to see his face when he came downstairs and saw me talking to his parents and showing texts that he had sent to me. So that was the last problem I had with the kid, but it was still scary before I knew who was behind it all.
This happened in 2014. My friends and I were 15 or 16 years old and living in our local town. We were a bit mischievous as a friend group at the time, and we would often be trying to find or get our hands on alcohol. It was autumn as I remember us being wrapped in warm clothing. It was getting dark out early, and we would be hanging out at the parks around town. We eventually got our hands on some vodka, and then we headed to the large park in the center of town. This park is well lit on many paths, but being nervous underage drinkers, we headed as far into the open grass as possible so as to not be seen. I don't remember any of us noticing anybody around as we entered, which made sense as it was getting darker and it was a chilly evening. We sat in a circle, about 6 of us, all girls, and passed around the bottle and played some drinking games. We spent about half an hour drinking and we were laughing and having a good time. All of a sudden, we heard a phone ring. I asked whose it was, as I didn't recognize the ringtone. Everybody looked to their bags, but it was none of our phones. We then noticed in the distance closer to the path, maybe about 30 feet away, a silhouette. This person put their hand in their pocket and took out a phone, which was the source of the ringing. We all went silent as we watched this figure's movements, and at the same time, we attempted to hurriedly shove our belongings into our bags and get to our feet. Before we were all ready to move away, the person started walking towards us. I mostly remember one friend shouting, "Run," and we all followed her lead. At first, being lazy and a little drunk, I wondered to myself if running was really necessary. It was probably just somebody telling us to leave the park. The closest exit to the park was up a steep hill. Trying to keep pace with my friends, I looked behind me, hoping to see this stranger back on the path so I could stop running. Any doubt I had with our reaction was instantly dissipated when I saw this figure sprinting after us full bore up the hill. I shouted that we were being chased, and none of us looked behind us or slowed down until we were out of the park and some distance down the well-lit street. We never worked out exactly what happened, but I remember that I did not tell my mom about it. A year or two later, a man was killed in that park in an unprovoked attack. I think I had made myself forget and suppress the incident from the previous fall somewhat after finding that out.
This happened many years ago in the 1990s. I was in high school at the time and lived with my parents and older sister at home. I was constantly using my phone to talk to my friends on almost a daily basis. This was before social media, obviously, and was before texting was really that popular. Every time I would call my friends, I would dial the entire number. There was speed dial and stuff like that, but I just didn't really use it. I had all my friends' numbers memorized, and I could dial really fast. So on this particular night, I was at home by myself. My parents were gone somewhere, I don't remember where, and so was my sister. I was going to call my friend Jacqueline and ask if she wanted to come over and hang out because I was bored. We would hang out at each other's places all the time. I think it must have been a Friday night, because normally I wouldn't have called people to hang out that late. And also, I don't think my parents and sister would have been out late on a weeknight. Anyways, after I dialed Jacqueline's number, I remember that she picked up. As soon as she did, I just started talking. We were such good friends and called each other so much that we really didn't say, "Hello, who's there?" We had caller ID as well, so we would know when each other was calling. As soon as I heard her pick up, I just said, "Hey, I'm bored, my parents and sister are gone, so I'm just home by myself. What are you doing? Do you want to come over?" After I said this, there was just silence on the other end. I said, "Hello?" Then the phone call ended as the other line hung up. I was confused. Why would my best friend Jacqueline hang up on me, and why wouldn't she say anything? So I dialed her again to call her back. I was thinking that it had to be a mistake and we just randomly got disconnected or something. This time when I called her, she picked up again. Except this time she said, "What's up?" I asked her if she had just hung up on me. She said no. I told her how I had just called her, and she said that she did not get any calls from me until just now. I was confused for a moment, until I realized that I must have dialed the wrong number before. Perhaps I got one of the digits wrong and someone else had picked up. This was kind of awkward because I had actually talked to them. Why would they not say anything though? Either way, it was not too big of a deal, but just slightly embarrassing. So I went on to ask Jacqueline if she wanted to come over, but she said she could not because she was about to watch a movie with her parents. So we talked for maybe a minute longer and then hung up. After that, I just decided to go to the living room and see what was on TV or something like that. So, around 30 minutes later probably, as I was there on the couch in the living room, I heard a knock on the front door. This was really strange because it was nighttime. All the windows were covered, so I had no idea who would be there. I was instantly creeped out. After a pause of maybe 30 seconds, they knocked again. This time I went over to a front window and very carefully looked out of it. It was dark outside, but I could tell that a man was standing there. However, I could not see any details about him. He then tried to open the door, which thankfully was locked. I was now freaking out. Some random guy was trying to break in, it seemed. He then turned and walked away. I only saw his backside as he made his way to the street. I just remember that he was wearing a jacket, so I couldn't really tell what he looked like at all. The whole thing really freaked me out, but I was glad that he was now gone. It wasn't until a few minutes later that I wondered if he was the person that I accidentally called. I mean, I had mentioned that I was home alone, and I had also dialed a number in the same area code, so he would be local. But how he got my exact address, I'm not sure. It could also just be a crazy coincidence, but I don't think it was. After that, he never came back. But I often remember that and wonder if it was the same guy, and if so, how he knew where I lived exactly. I'm just glad that he never returned.
This happened about 5 years ago. I lived by myself at the time in the lower level of a one-bedroom townhouse. I'd been living there for a few months at the time. One night, like any other, after getting home from work, I had a pretty relaxing night at home and eventually fell asleep. The next morning when I woke up, the first thing I did was check my phone like I typically did. I saw right away that I had a bunch of missed calls. They all seemed to be from a number that I did not recognize. The calls had been between the hours of 3 and 4 a.m., and whoever it was didn't leave any voicemails. I had been fast asleep and was completely unaware. There had to be at least 7 or 8 calls. It seemed strange to me as to why some random number had called me so many times, but there were a number of fine and logical reasons. For the most part, I ignored it and went on with my day. I went to work once again and then returned after. I had forgotten all about the phone calls until it was nearly midnight. I was staying up later tonight because it was a Friday and I didn't have work the next day. I was watching TV on my couch when I felt my phone vibrating on the couch next to me. My phone was usually always on vibrate instead of having a ringtone, and I picked it up and looked. I didn't recognize the number, but instantly remembered the previous night and the phone calls from then. I figured it was a wrong number, and I decided to answer the phone to let whoever was calling know that they had the wrong person. I picked up and said hello. On the other end of the phone, though, I didn't hear anybody. I heard some movement and static, as if there was somebody there, but they weren't speaking. Maybe whoever this was kept calling me by accident or something. I said hello to them once again, but this time louder. Still, there was no response. I waited a little bit, and then said in a loud voice that I think they had called me by accident or had the wrong number. But still, I didn't hear anything, just the small noises from the other end. I decided to turn my phone onto speaker and turn the volume all the way up so that I could hear better. I listened closely. I could hear some breathing, and it sounded like whoever was there was maybe driving or something. I remained on the phone for several minutes, really curious as to who this was. Eventually, I figured this was a little bit ridiculous, and I decided I would just hang up on them. But literally right before I was about to press the red end call button, I heard somebody speak. They said, "I'm here," in a whispery voice that honestly gave me the creeps immediately. I was confused for a second, but then whoever was on the other end just hung up. I then heard a noise coming from outside, the sound of a car door shutting. Immediately I got the chills. I turned off my TV and looked out the window. It was dark, and there wasn't much lighting out there, but I did see the figure of a man walking up to my front door. That was followed by a small couple of knocks on my front door, and then the door trying to be opened without giving me any time to answer. Obviously, I wasn't going to, and instead, I grabbed my phone and got ready to call the police. I waited and listened, but didn't hear whoever was there for a while. However, I hadn't seen them walk away. From where I was sitting in my living room, I couldn't actually see the door from that angle. I waited and watched to see if they would walk away, and I was careful to try to stay hidden from them seeing me. As time went by, I was extremely nervous, but still wasn't seeing or hearing anything else. After probably about 15 minutes or so of this, I got up the courage to get up and go over to the door, or at least the window near the door where I could see out. When I went there and looked, I was expecting to see the guy standing there, but nobody was there. It was like he was completely gone. I went around after that, making sure that all the windows were closed and looking around outside, but I didn't see the guy again. It was hard to get to sleep, but I did eventually. The next morning, I hadn't received any more calls, and I didn't see any sign of somebody trying to break in. With it being daytime now, and I was feeling much more brave, out of curiosity, I decided to call the number again. When I did, though, it was as if the number didn't exist, just the recording message that I would have to hang up and dial again because the number was not in use.
This is something really crazy that happened back when I was in college. I was in graduate school and my best friend Paige and I would hang out all the time. We did not live together, but we each had roommates who we lived with. I rented a house with my roommate Rebecca, who was also a good friend and was in my program for school. The house was typical for college. It had a small front yard and was in a neighborhood right near campus with a lot of other houses. On this night, Rebecca was gone, and Paige was over at my house hanging out. We would be over at each other's places almost on a nightly basis. I believe it was a Friday and we didn't have classes or anything the next day, so we stayed up kind of late, and eventually Paige left to go back to her apartment. I remember that after she had left, I started getting ready to go to sleep. Shortly before I did, though, I got a call from Paige's roommate Presley. I was wondering why she was calling me, especially so late, so I answered. It was Paige speaking, and I answered. It was Paige speaking, and she asked me if she had forgotten her phone at my place. Apparently, Paige could not find her cell phone anywhere, so she was using her roommates to call me. I went out into the living room where we had been hanging out most of the time. While still on the phone, I began looking. I was not seeing it anywhere, though. Paige was telling me as I was looking that she had it at my place and remembered using it there. Then she said that she didn't use it on the way back and didn't have it at her place. So it was logical to believe that it was at my place. Only then did I have the thought to actually call the phone. It was late at night and I was tired, I guess. So I hung up with Paige and then called her phone. I was hoping and expecting to hear it ringing or vibrating across the room or something. But to my surprise, I heard it pick up. When her phone picked up, at first there was silence on the other end. After a few seconds of me being too surprised to speak, I finally did. I said, "Hello?" There was nothing at first, but I soon heard breathing on the other end. I said, "This is my friend's phone and I think she lost it. Did you find it somewhere?" After a few more seconds of silence, I finally heard a man's voice say, "Yeah." Then he said, "I'll bring you the phone." I said, "Actually, it's not my phone. You could bring it to my friend." He said, "No, I'll bring it to you." I was just happy that someone had the phone and was willing to bring it back. I gave him my address and then he hung up. So at that point, I immediately called Paige back via her roommate's phone. When I did, I told her what happened. Paige was so confused because she didn't know how some random guy had her phone. And now that I was thinking about it, I didn't either. I mean, she had her phone inside of my house. I knew that for a fact. Then she simply left and drove straight home without stopping anywhere. In my mind, the only explanation was that she either dropped her phone getting in or out of her car, so it possibly had been on the ground on my street or in her parking lot. Either way, the guy was supposedly on his way to bring it back now. So Paige said that she was on her way back to my place and started heading over. About 10 minutes later, she arrived. The man had not yet. We hung out in the living room wondering when he would arrive. After like 45 minutes, I called Paige's phone again. He didn't answer though. We were worried that he was not going to return the phone anymore, and unfortunately, I didn't have her location stalked or anything like that. Sometime later, I got up and walked over to the front of the house. I started looking out of the window just out of curiosity. By now, it was very late at night. But then I saw something. There was a man walking down the sidewalk. He kind of stopped in front of our house. I ducked down, but secretly kept watching. The guy started to walk into my front yard, which was very small, but had some bushes and trees. He kind of paced around a bit. Then he started walking towards the doors. I knew this had to be the guy with Paige's phone, but he didn't go to the front door. Instead, he walked past it and then walked along the front of the house in the yard. By now, Paige was over at the other window and watching as well. The man went around towards the back of the house and we were very confused. We were also kind of creeped out. He could clearly see where the front door was, so why was he going around back? We moved to the back of the house to see where this guy would go. He ended up sort of looking in a back window and then walked around the backyard a little bit.
Then he made his way to the front of the house and finally went to the front door. He then knocked on it. I went over and nervously opened the door, but when I answered, I opened it just a crack. The guy said hi and said that he had the phone. As friendly as I could, pretending I did not just see him creep around my house, I said thank you very much. I then told him he could give me the phone, and I held out my hand. He seemed to reluctantly give me the phone. Then, as I took it, he asked if he could come inside quick. I asked why, and he said that he needed to use the bathroom. I told him sorry, but ours wasn't working, which I made up on the spot. It really did work, but I just didn't want this guy coming in after his sketchy behavior. The guy didn't leave right away, though. He said, "Could I just come in for a minute anyways?" I said, "No, sorry." Then I closed the door and instantly locked it. It might have seemed rude, but I wouldn't have acted that way had he not been so weird. We watched the guy standing around for another minute or so. Then he walked around the front yard for a while before finally leaving. We were so creeped out that Paige ended up staying over at my place and slept on the couch that night. We figured that the guy saw Paige's phone after she probably dropped it on the street or something. But why he was so sketchy, I don't know. The rest of my time living in that house, I thankfully never saw him again.
This is something that happened not too long ago. I got a call on my cell phone from a new number. I didn't recognize it at all, and most of the people I know show up as their name when they call me. But I recently graduated from college and I know lots of people. I've made many friends over the years, so there was a chance that it was somebody that I knew but didn't have their number. People get new phones and numbers sometimes as well, so I answered it. The person on the other end just said hi. I asked who it was as I heard a man speak. He said that he got my number from one of my friends and hoped I didn't mind. I said, "Okay, well, who are you?" I was positive that I had no clue who this guy was. He didn't answer me. I hung up on him at that point. It was a pretty strange interaction. Something about the guy was weird for sure, but I thought that was that. He didn't call me for the rest of the day or anything. The next day, though, he texted me. The text said, quote, "You can tell a lot about somebody by looking them up online." I didn't know what he meant by this. Was he saying that he looked me up online? I had social media accounts on things like Instagram and Facebook, and people could see things about me if they wanted. I responded to the guy asking what he meant. I told him that he was being creepy as well. The guy did not respond to my texts, at least not right away. The next time I was contacted by him was the following day. He sent me a few text messages. When I saw they were images, I got a bad feeling. I opened them up to see that one was of my apartment complex and the other was of my car. It looked like he had taken the pictures himself. My car was parked in the parking lot of the apartment complex. This was extremely weird now. Somehow, he had found out where I lived, but I didn't know what his point was by showing me this. It was almost like this guy was bragging about being a stalker or something. After this, I blocked him. The crazy thing is that after that, I haven't been contacted by him since. Obviously he couldn't because his number was blocked, but he didn't reach out to me on social media or anything. I mean, I'm glad that he didn't, but I also don't know why. It all remains a bit of a mystery to me. Several years ago, I was the victim of a wrong number call. My cell phone rang at about 9 p.m. at night. I was at home and by myself. I lived with a roommate in a 2-bedroom house in a suburb of a major city. When I looked at my phone, it had a number, but I didn't recognize it. I decided that I would answer anyways. I was kind of curious as to who was calling me. Spam calls generally don't take place at night. There was a slim chance it was somebody that I knew. When I accepted the call, I put the phone to my ear and asked who it was that was calling. At first, nobody said anything on the other end of the line. There was just silence. I repeated myself. After that, there was a few more seconds of silence. I was just about to hang up on them when somebody finally spoke. I could hear that it was a man's voice, but it sounded kind of raspy, almost as if they were trying to disguise their voice. They said, "Is this Jake?" I said, "No," and I thought they had the wrong number. The person responded saying no. Then they asked, "Who is this?" I didn't give my name, but I said once more that I didn't know anybody named Jake and they should dial the number again. The person didn't respond, but I heard them breathing heavily. I then hung up on them. This call was pretty creepy in itself, but it doesn't end there. The very next night, at an even later time of about 11 p.m., I got a call once more from a random number. I picked up, and after I said hi, whoever was on the other end hung up on me, only to call back about 10 minutes later. When they called back, they once again hung up, only about 5 seconds after I answered the phone. I decided to text the number and ask who it was because they kept calling me. They didn't respond to my text though. The next night, once more, I was called at an odd hour of the night. It was starting to annoy me now, and I didn't answer it. I blocked the number instead. But now, a different number called me, about an hour after I blocked the other one. It was really late now. I answered, but there was no talking on the other end. It was silence for a good 10 seconds before whoever was on the other end hung up. I decided to block this number too. After I blocked it, I thought that was the end, and for a while it was. A few days went by, and I didn't receive a single call from somebody that I didn't know. But one night, probably 4 nights after the last phone call, I heard a noise outside. I ignored it at first because it was just the sound of a car driving by. But when I glanced to the window casually, I noticed a car going really slow. It pulled right in front of my house and then just parked on the side of the road. This was very unusual and hadn't happened before. My roommate was gone at the moment. I walked over to the window and looked. It was a typical looking car, and it was night, so I didn't get a make or model. All I know is that it was just sitting in front of my house at nearly midnight. I opened up my front door to get a better view. When I did, the car suddenly pulled away. Now, to that point, I didn't suspect the car and the phone calls to be linked. But about an hour later, just as I was about to go to bed, the car returned. It pulled in once more to the exact same spot. It parked right in front of my house with the engine still running. I watched it out the window for a good 20 minutes. Nobody got out, and the car did not turn off. It just kept sitting there. I didn't want to go to bed with the car parked there like that. I also didn't think I could call the police for a car just parked on the street. I walked over and opened my front door again. Looking back, I don't know what I was going to do. I certainly did not want to approach them. But when I opened up the front door, the car sped away again. Some time went by, and I didn't see the car again, so I went to sleep. After that night, I never noticed the car parking in front of my house after that, and I never got another call either. I still think it was the same person, but what they were doing, I don't know.
Something really weird happened a while back. I was at home one night in my apartment. I don't remember exactly what time it was, but I think that it was kind of late. I just remember hearing my phone vibrating a ways away from me, and I went over to look. When I did, I saw that I was getting a call, but it was from a random number that I didn't know. It was strange because normally the toll-free calls and telemarketers would be during the day. Out of curiosity, I decided to answer the phone. I'm not really sure why looking back, but I did. When I picked up, I said hello. There was at first just silence on the other end. I said hello again a few seconds later. Then, finally, someone spoke. A man on the other end finally said, "I guess I have the wrong number." I said, "Okay." Then he hung up. I figured that it was an innocent mistake of him just dialing wrong. I didn't think too much of it. The whole thing was a little bit weird, but nothing to be suspicious about. The very next night, it was a similar situation, and I was home by myself, as I live alone in my apartment. This time, I know that it was really late. In fact, I was just about to go to bed, but my phone started ringing again. I had remembered the call from the night before. When I looked, it was once more a number that I didn't have saved. It very well could have been the same number from the previous night, but I didn't definitively recognize it at the time. I answered again and said hello. Once more, there was at first silence, but then I heard a man say hello. I recognized the voice, and it was the same guy from yesterday. I said something like, "Oh, it's you again." I then asked him who he was trying to call. I was wondering who my number was getting confused with. But the guy didn't answer me. Instead, he just asked me what my name was. I gave him my first name, and then he said okay, and then just hung up. I was really confused. The whole thing was pretty strange. I mean, why would he call me again if it was the wrong number? Wouldn't he have learned from his mistake? Not too long after this, I went to bed. The next morning, I woke up and saw that I had about 10 missed calls on my cell phone. This was really weird. I looked, and they were all from that same number. Why did this guy keep calling me? I also saw that he left one voicemail. Out of curiosity, I decided to play it. When I did, the first thing that I heard was a man breathing. It sounded like he was moving around, maybe walking or something. His breathing into the phone continued for about 10 or 15 seconds, but he didn't say anything. Then I suddenly heard the sound of glass breaking. It was really loud, like he shattered a window or something like that. The voicemail then abruptly ended. When I heard this, I was super creeped out. Right then and there, I blocked the number. My apartment was fine. He didn't break the windows there because I was on the 5th floor, but nevertheless, I looked around and made sure that everything was fine, which it was. The building was fine too, so I'm not sure what glass he broke. Since then, I haven't heard from the guy. I have received no more strange calls. However, I still wonder who that guy was and what he was doing.
Several years ago, I was driving home one day from work. I lived in a pretty rural area, and I had to drive over an hour just to get to and from work each day. Basically, the last 20 minutes of the drive was like the middle of nowhere. As I was driving, I had made it to within maybe 30 minutes of my house, and my phone started to ring. I glanced at it for just a second because I was driving, and it was a number. All of my contacts are programmed in with the person's name, so I wasn't quite sure who could be calling, and I decided to answer it. When I did, I heard a sort of deep male voice talking on the other end. The first thing he said was that he was right behind me and he knew exactly where I was going. I asked who this was, but I only heard silence after that. After a few seconds, the voice continued. He said once again that he knew where I was going and I needed to cooperate. I looked behind me and sure enough saw a car. However, it was dark out and all I saw was headlights. There was no way of seeing anybody inside. The voice said that I needed to follow the instructions or I would be harmed, and if I drove somewhere else, such as the police station, they reminded me that they knew where I lived. My mind started racing when I heard this. I had no idea who this guy was or why he was following me. I also didn't know what he wanted. The guy said that he was going to tell me where to turn and give me directions on a place to drive to. We were far enough out by now that we were the only 2 cars on the road. The man said to turn at the next road up ahead, and when I got there, I did. The car behind me turned as well. I asked the guy where we were going and what he wanted, but he replied by saying that the more I asked him, the angrier he would be. We were now on some dirt road with just woods and tall grass on both sides. I had a really bad feeling about this. I didn't want to know what the guy following me had planned. I knew it was probably nothing good, and I'm not sure what exactly got into me, but I had like an adrenaline rush. I started speeding my car and driving faster. There were really no other cars nearby, and mine was an SUV with 4-wheel drive, so it could handle going fast on a dirt road. The car behind me sped up as well. When I saw a connecting road up ahead, I slammed on my brakes and turned to it at the last minute. I basically started driving like a maniac. The guy was still on the phone with me and started yelling at me to stop and basically started threatening me. I saw the car speeding behind me trying to keep up, which was just a regular 4-door sedan. I made another sharp turn onto a bigger and paved road. If I had to guess, I was probably going about 80 miles per hour. When I did this, the car behind me tried to do the same, but he couldn't quite make the sharp turn and ended up going into the ditch. From there, the car slid and he crashed into a tree. I kept going and then called the police and reported what had happened. I ended up driving a ways to the nearest police station, and there I was questioned about the incident. In the end, I never found out what the guy wanted from me or why he called me. I also have no clue how he got my number. I ended up getting a ticket for speeding, and they dropped the ticket for reckless driving after I took a course. I was just happy I got away from the guy, and I never saw or heard from him again.
I went to Walmart one night many years ago. This was back when Walmarts used to be open 24 hours. It was always interesting to go to Walmart in the middle of the night. The store would usually be very quiet. Sometimes you would see the employees stocking the shelves. Other times you would see some of the craziest customers. And other times it would be very quiet and peaceful. I've always been a night owl and I often used to work late as well. On this night I had worked sort of late, but I went back to my apartment after work and then decided to go out shopping to the nearby Walmart. It was like a 5-minute drive from my apartment, and I left to go there probably a little after midnight. But when I needed to do a little shopping, I enjoyed going so late. There would be no traffic on the roads and hardly any traffic in the store as well. So I remember that when I got to the Walmart, I parked kind of in the far back of the parking lot. I walked inside the store and started shopping. I didn't need to get that much stuff, and I think I just had a shopping basket and not a cart. Mostly, I was in the grocery department of the store getting food that I needed. When I was inside the store, I saw only a few other people. Most of them were employees, and I saw a couple of other people that were shopping, but not very many. After being in the store for maybe 10 minutes, I remembered that I heard my cell phone start to ring. I was confused as to why somebody would be calling me so late at night. I took it out of my pocket and answered. When I did, I said hello, but heard nothing on the other end. Then I heard someone breathing. Multiple times I asked who was there, but no one said anything. So at that point, I hung up, thinking that it was probably a wrong number or somebody called me by mistake. I looked at the number and it was not one that I recognized at all. I was a little creeped out from hearing the breathing but nobody speaking at all, but I just carried on with my shopping. But then, surprisingly, like 5 minutes later, that same number called me again. I answered once more and said hello. There was once again silence. I asked who was there, but heard nothing. Then they hung up on me. I was even more confused and also creeped out now. I continued my shopping and finished up. Then I went to the front of the store and checked out. When I did not receive any more calls. After checking out, I walked to the exit doors and stepped out into the parking lot. When I did, I could see my car parked a long ways away. I remember that it was a cool and sort of foggy night. When I saw my car, though, I noticed that there was a man standing next to it. He was literally leaning on my car, but facing in the opposite direction, and there were no other cars parked directly around mine, so I didn't know why he was there. The man was wearing dark pants and a hooded sweatshirt, so I couldn't make out any details about him at all. I couldn't see any part of his face with him standing in the opposite direction. I had started to walk to my car, but now stopped just about 20 feet into the parking lot. It seemed really creepy. Then I suddenly heard my phone start to ring in my pocket again. I took it out and looked. It was the same person calling. I answered it again and this time said, "Why do you keep calling me?" There was still no answer. However, I looked to the man that was standing next to my car in the parking lot. I saw that he was now holding a cell phone up to his ear. Was this the guy who was calling me? I asked him, "Are you standing next to my car right now?" When I said this, he did not answer but hung up on me. Then I saw the guy standing by my car put the cell phone back in his pocket. The man then started to turn around and face me. When he did, I saw that he was wearing sunglasses, but I really couldn't make out any other details. He was far away and it was dark out. I was so creeped out that I turned around and walked back inside the Walmart. I just started walking around the store, hoping that when I went back out, the man would be gone. A short time later, the guy called again. I declined the call and then shut my phone off completely. I started wandering the aisles of Walmart aimlessly, just wondering to myself who that guy was and what was going on. After walking around for like 15 minutes, I was somewhere in the back part of the Walmart near the auto parts area. I came around a random aisle and saw the man now inside the Walmart. He was kind of far away and walking down another aisle. He was still wearing the hooded sweatshirt and sunglasses. I quickly turned the corner of another aisle and was out of sight of the guy. Then I walked to another aisle as fast as I could and started quickly making my way to the front. A short time into that and I just started running. I didn't look back and sprinted to the exit doors. When I got there, I ran out into the parking lot and went for my car. I made it there, got inside, and looked around. I saw the creepy guy just walking out of the Walmart and into the parking lot. Then I quickly drove away. I got home and wasn't followed or anything. I never saw that guy again. I turned my phone back on and saw that he had tried to call multiple times. I blocked his number. But I still have many unanswered questions. How did he get my number and who was he? Had he been following me or stalking me somehow? The whole thing was very strange, but I'm happy that I never saw him again after that. For a little background, this happened last year at work. I'm a woman and work in an office building in a pretty typical job. One day, I was bored at work and didn't have a whole lot to do. I got a random phone call kind of out of nowhere. Being bored, I decided to answer it. I did not know who was calling me as the number was not one that I had saved. Everybody who I typically talked to was a contact in my phone. This included friends, family, work people, and really everybody. So this was a little bit strange. When I answered the phone, some random guy said hi to me. I said hi. There was a bit of silence, and then I asked who he was. The man said that he must have the wrong number. I told him no problem. However, he did not hang up the phone. Instead, he started asking me questions. He first asked who I was, and I told him my first name. I thought that that would lead to him telling me who he was trying to call. But then he asked me where I was, and I said I was at work. I didn't tell him where I worked or anything. He then asked if I lived in the city that I did live in, and I said yes, still curious. I was wondering why he was asking me these questions. I remember that he asked me a couple of other things, but I interrupted him and said that I was at work and I really couldn't talk. The guy was starting to seem weird. So he said okay, and then I hung up the phone. I went on with work, and he didn't call back or anything. Probably like the next day or so, I got a random friend request on Facebook from somebody who I did not know. It was a guy, and we had 0 mutual friends. I did not accept it, but I also didn't decline it. I wasn't entirely sure if maybe I knew him somehow, but overall I just kind of ignored it. The next night I got a phone call again from the same number. Now I was at home and not at work. I was curious though, so I decided to answer. When I did, it was the same guy. He told me that he sent me a friend request on Facebook. In the call, he was acting super friendly and nice and told me to accept it. I went on Facebook and did so, I'm not sure why. He started making chit-chat, but I cut it short and said that I had to be going. After ending the call, I went on the guy's Facebook page and looked at it. He seemed pretty weird. The more I looked at it, the more I did not like him. He would just post random weird stuff, and he seemed kinda creepy. Like he would take these selfies with wide eyes and stuff, and he would post like 10 times a day. A few days went by without any contact from him. I had pretty much forgot all about the guy until he messaged me on Facebook. I did not want to talk to him, so I didn't respond and I deleted him, but I forgot to block his number. The next morning, I woke up to a slew of threatening texts. He asked me why I deleted him and even threatened to come to my job, mentioning it by name. I texted back telling him to leave me alone, and then I blocked him. I thought that would do the trick. A few days went by with nothing. Everything seemed fine, and I forgot all about the guy. But then, one day, I was at work again like normal. The way my office is I have sort of a cubicle in a much larger room. It's not quite a full cubicle though, so I can see around the entire office really. I sit at a table with my computer, and there are people kind of all over in the large room. When I was working, I heard some people start talking over near the entrance from the hallway. I looked over, and I saw that guy. I couldn't believe it. He had come to my job. He didn't see me right away, as I was kind of in the back corner of the room, not out of sight, but not that obvious either. I instantly ducked down and hid underneath my desk. My coworker saw me and asked what was going on. Meanwhile, the guy was talking to, I think it was Donald, who's one of the guys that works closer to the door. He was asking who the guy was and what he was doing here. The guy was saying that he was there to see someone, but when questioned, he didn't say who. He tried to walk farther in, and Donald was standing right next to him trying to stop him. I motioned for my coworker to get down for some reason too, so then she hid underneath her desk. I whispered to her the gist of the situation. The guy basically started walking around the office, I guess looking for me, but Donald was eventually able to kind of get him out of the room. He then closed the door and locked it. The guy started knocking on the door and then apparently asked for me, but Donald had it at that point and yelled at him that he was calling the cops. This finally got the man to leave. I then came out and explained to my coworkers the situation. Everyone was pretty confused, and we all agreed that it was crazy. Thankfully, after that, the man did not return, or else we would have called the cops. I still can't believe that the guy actually showed up at my job. I'm not really sure how he found out where I worked and stuff, or how he even got my number. I really have no idea who he was. But I hope that I never see him or hear from him again. This happened many years ago. I was much younger and a single man living on my own. I was out with a friend one night watching the game at a bar. I remember that he had to leave early for whatever reason, so I stayed there by myself because I wanted to see the end of the game. I was sitting at the bar, and towards the end of it, I noticed a woman sitting a few seats down. The bar had not really been that busy. I didn't notice when exactly she got there, but I don't think she was there for the whole game. There were other people around. The bar wasn't dead, but it was not super busy either. The woman seemed to be there by herself, and she was just sitting at the bar drinking something. I found her to be attractive, so I was actually thinking of striking up a conversation with her, but she spoke to me first. She looked over and asked if I had bet money on the game. Admittedly, I had bet the over on the score, and I told her that. We got to talking a little bit, maybe like 20 minutes, and before I knew it, the game was over. I thought that it was a good conversation, and shortly after the game, the woman said that she was going to leave. I decided to ask her for her number, and when I did, without hesitation, she said that I could have it. She told me the number, and then I put it in my phone, and she left. I was feeling good about how things had gone. When I talked to her, I was funny, she was laughing, I asked her questions, and she had asked me questions. It seemed like a really good conversation in my opinion. I was excited to hopefully see her again and text with her. The next day, I did something out of character. I was feeling bold, so I decided to call her instead of just text. The way our conversation had gone, I figured that she would not mind. So I called her number sometime in the late morning. She picked up, and I heard nothing on the other end. So I spoke. I said, "Hello," and I was literally starting to say something else when the phone call just ended. It was like she had hung up. My heart sank. Then, moments later, I got a text. It said, "Who are you?" I replied with my name and said, "We met last night, remember?" In my mind, there was still a sliver of hope in this moment, and I was hanging on to it, even if that sounds pathetic. She texted back saying, "Huh?" Again, my heart sank. I thought to myself, how would she not remember me? I had spoken to her for a long time, and I knew she wasn't drunk. Sure, both of us had had drinks, but I only had 2 the whole night, and I can confirm that she did not even seem drunk at all. So I decided to try to clear things up by calling her again. I felt that I could explain the situation better over speaking and not texting, so I dialed her back. This time she picked up again, except it was not the girl that I had met at the bar. It was some random guy, and he sounded angry. Obviously, I couldn't see the guy, but he sounded large and had a sort of deep and booming voice. Right away, he was angry. I thought for a moment maybe he was the woman's husband or boyfriend. He asked who I was and why I kept bothering him, and asked if I was trying to prank him. He said all this without letting me speak. When he was finally done yelling at me, I told him that I had met a girl at a bar last night and she gave me this number. He started yelling at me again, saying that that was the most unbelievable thing he ever heard and that he will not be harassed and he ought to call the cops on me. Then he said, matter of fact, I should come down and find you and beat you myself. I didn't know why this guy was so angry. I asked him if he knew the woman, and he said no, once more going on and on an angry rant. This guy was one of the angriest people I've ever spoken to. So what? I called the wrong number. Is that like the crime of the century? I told him I was sorry and that I had the wrong number, and I said I really didn't mean to bother him. He started ranting again, saying I had better leave him alone now. I hung up at that point, cutting him off from another one of his rants. I double-checked the number that I dialed with the number the girl gave me. It was the same. So either she intentionally gave me the wrong number or I wrote it down wrong. Part of me wanted to believe that I just wrote it down wrong, but deep down, I knew the truth. She had given me the wrong number, but it didn't end there. The guy who I called by accident then started texting me. He started spamming me with threatening messages. He was saying how I harassed him and how he was going to find me and hunt me down and get me. After like the 10th text in the span of 2 or 3 minutes, I blocked him. And after that, I didn't get any more of those texts. I went back to the bar a few times over the next several months. I didn't want to see the woman again, but if I did, I was planning to talk to her about giving me the wrong number. However, I never saw her again. I'm still kind of mad about it, but it happens, I guess.
This happened on the last day of college classes one year. I went to a large university in a pretty typical college town. I had a group of friends and lived with 2 other roommates, Sarah and Courtney, in an apartment. We had a lot of other friends in our friend group as well. So after we had all finished our finals on the last day of school, everybody was going out. I'm not really a huge drinker, so I never really have more than a couple of drinks on any occasion, but I still would go out with friends and have a good time. So that afternoon, when everybody was done with classes, we went to a friend's house to hang out. This went on into the night, and then we started going to bars. We went to one, and many other college students were there as well. It was fun, but as the night got later, things got crazier. It turned into a pretty classic college night out. The bars were crowded, almost everybody got drunk, and we ended up going to several different bars. People would hang out at one, then walk to another nearby one. It was hard to keep track of where everybody was. Some of my friends were still at the previous bar, most were at the current one that I was at, and some went to another. Once it got past midnight, a few people started to go home. I was hanging out and talking to some people at one of the bars where I think most of my friends were. I know that Sarah was there, but Courtney had gone to another one. I heard that some people were at a different bar, and I liked that one better, so I decided to walk there. It wasn't that far away, and as I was going there, I got a phone call. I looked and saw that it was from Courtney. I had not seen her in a while, and I wondered what she was doing, so I answered the phone. When I did, she said, "Help." She sounded very upset. Then she asked if I could come and get her. I asked what was wrong, and then she hung up the phone. Now, I knew that Courtney had been a little bit drunk, so I was concerned for her, and I tried to call her back because I didn't know where she was. When I called her, though, she did not answer. Then she sent me a text, which was her location. I put it in my GPS, and it was about a 10-minute walk from where I was, so I decided to go there. I didn't recognize the place. It was not a bar, but it appeared to be a house. I walked there by myself, which definitely was a bad idea, but I wasn't with anybody at the time. So when I got there, it was a dark and quiet street, but it looked like a pretty typical college neighborhood. A lot of smaller, older houses, all pretty close to one another. I saw where her location was, and it was inside of the house. I didn't know who lived there, so I didn't know why Courtney would be there. Now I was feeling pretty nervous. I walked up to the front door, and in doing so, I noted that all the lights in the house appeared off. Could this have been a mistake? I tried calling her again, but was sent directly to voicemail immediately. When I got to the door, I saw that it was already open. I looked inside the front door and pushed it open a little. It creaked, but I heard nothing inside. There were no noises of anybody talking or anything. It was almost like the house looked abandoned. I stood there in the doorway looking and listening for a good minute or so. I just felt like it was a bad idea to walk inside, but Courtney was supposedly in there and I needed to help her. Then I suddenly heard footsteps. I saw a male figure walking through the darkness inside. He was very quickly walking straight for me. I just turned around and sprinted away from there. I ran off out of the yard and into the street and then across the street. I heard the guy going out of the doorway and starting to run after me. I cut through the neighbor's property across the street and I even hopped the fence. Then I went to the next street over and ran down it for a while. By that point, I felt like I had lost the guy. I didn't hear him, and when I looked around, I didn't see him either. I wasted no time and I dialed 911. I told them of what happened and I thought that my friend needed help. So I waited there, and about 10 minutes later, a police car arrived. He went to the house and then knocked on the door. A while later, Courtney came to the door crying. I was glad to see her again. I found out all the crazy details a short time later. She said that a guy at the bar had been talking to her. Somehow he convinced her to let him give her a ride to another bar. But he didn't go to another bar. Instead, he drove to the house. Then another guy was there and they forced her to go inside. They would not let her leave and forced her to call me and tell me to go there too. The guys then sent the location text to me and took her phone away from her. She was held in one of the rooms against her will and thankfully not harmed, but was threatened. I guess they had seen me with her and wanted us both. What the plan was after I got there, I guess, was to make me go inside and kidnap us. It came awfully close to happening, but I'm glad that it didn't. After I got away, both guys left the house. However, they did not return. The men ended up being located and caught a while later. The house was not theirs, but belonged to a friend who had just moved out. It was such a crazy experience. I'm very happy that Courtney is okay and that I did not go into that house.
Just last week, I tried to call my friend Alex, but got the wrong number. She had literally just gotten a new phone, service plan, and number. She didn't immediately give me the new number though, and I had to get it through our mutual friend Josie. When I dialed, somebody picked up, but it certainly wasn't Alex. It was a man's voice. I asked who it was, and the person said that I had the wrong number and then hung up on me. I redialed Alex's number more carefully this time so that I wouldn't get it wrong again. This time, Alex didn't pick up either. Nobody did, and I left her a message letting her know that it was me who called her and for her to add me to her new phone. About an hour later, she texted me back. We texted back and forth for a little while, and Alex asked me if she could come over to my place the next night. I said sure, and it would work out fine because I didn't have anything going on the next night. When the next night arrived, Alex texted me saying that she was coming over. Then I didn't hear from her for a while. I was just sitting on my couch watching TV as I waited for her to get there. At last, she texted me. She told me that she was at my front door and to let her in. My door was actually unlocked, and I told her this. A few seconds after sending the text, the door opened. I looked over from the couch and saw somebody walking in, but it wasn't Alex. It was a taller, larger man who was wearing a baseball cap and had glasses on. He closed the door behind him and then started walking towards me. I was obviously really surprised. I didn't say anything to this guy though. I just went with my initial reaction to run away. He was maybe 30 feet away from me, and I was close to my bedroom, so I jumped off the couch and ran inside my room. I then shut the door and locked it. Within 5 seconds, he was at the door on the other side. He tried opening it, and when it wouldn't open, he started saying my name. "Maya, open the door." I screamed that I was calling the police. The guy tried opening the door again and then started pressing on it. I began dialing 911. I didn't care if he heard what I was doing, but he seemed desperate to try to stop me. He then walked away from the door, and I was hoping that he was leaving. I began speaking with the 911 operator, letting them know what was going on. But only a few moments later, the man returned, and I started hearing loud bangs on my door. He must have been trying to break the door down. I of course mentioned this on the phone, and I was not going to hang up the call until the police arrived. As the bangs on the door got louder, I moved into the back corner of my bedroom and into the closet. Luckily, my closet had a door on it, and it was big enough for me to go inside. The door didn't lock though, but it still made me feel a lot safer. I could still hear the guy, and he wasn't letting up. I was sure that he was going to break the door down. At last, I stopped hearing the banging, and I heard some commotion in the main part of my apartment. The police must have arrived. I couldn't hear all that well because I was still hidden in my closet. I was surprised by how fast the police got there. It was probably like 3 or 4 minutes total. I finally emerged to see several officers in my room and others in my apartment. They had arrested the guy, and I saw that my bedroom door was heavily damaged. Thankfully, it held up just enough. I later found out that the guy had stolen my friend Alex's phone. I had never dialed the wrong number after all. It was right. I just reached the person that stole her phone. He had been texting me pretending to be Alex as well. Alex was able to get her phone back, and I will have to get my door replaced.
This story takes place a couple of years back. I was living with my good friend and roommate Jessica at the time. We both had Costco memberships and would shop there together for the house roughly once a week. So one time when we went there, we shopped around for all the stuff that we needed. It was pretty busy like it usually is there, so it took a while to get everything. By the time we were done, we had a cart full of items. We were also pretty hungry. Costco has a food court that is known for having some great deals. After we were shopping, I went to get a hot dog and Jessica said she wanted a pizza slice. I told her I would get them and she said she would go to the car and start loading it up. So she left and I got in line at the concession stand. After ordering and getting the food, my hands were pretty full. I was holding a hot dog, a pizza, and a drink as well. It was just exactly right then when I felt my phone vibrating in my pocket from getting a call. I could not reach it at the moment, and I figured that I would just see who it was and call them back when I got to the car. So I walked out of the Costco and then into the parking lot. When I did, I headed for where we had parked, which was pretty far away. But when I arrived where the car was, it was just gone. It was like Jessica had left without me. I was so confused. At first, I thought that I was in the wrong spot, and I looked around the parking lot. Then I noticed a man walking towards me from about 50 feet away farther into the parking lot. He wasn't near any cars, and something about him gave me a bad feeling, so I started to walk away. I went to another row, thinking possibly I had confused where we parked. The car wasn't there either, so I went to another row. It wasn't there either, and then I noticed the same creepy guy had followed me to that row as well. By now, I was creeped out and frustrated. My phone started vibrating once again, so I quickly walked back for the Costco. I got back inside, sat down at a table in the food court, and set everything down. I looked around, and the man had not followed me in. When I looked at my phone, I saw several missed calls from Jessica. I quickly called her back. She answered right away and said that she had to leave. She said when she was loading the car, some creepy guy approached her. He tried to enter her car, and she was able to get inside and lock the doors without him getting in. But he kept trying the door, so she drove away. That's when she called me the first time to warn me and let me know. She was going to drive around and then pick me up, but I hadn't seen her call. I told her that I had seen the man as well and that I was back inside Costco now. So then I reported the guy to a Costco employee. Then when Jessica reached the doors, I quickly went outside and got into her car. Then we drove away. When we did, we saw the man standing around randomly in the parking lot. We were glad to make it out of there. That was the scariest experience that I ever had going to Costco. I'm a teacher at a high school, and this is my scariest experience from my time on the job. It happened in just my second year of teaching full-time. I had been hired at a high school nearby to where I had grown up. I was really happy to get the job, and the first year had gone well. Most of the students at the school were pretty good. There were a few that were not though, but I feel like most schools that size have them. One day, I was teaching class like any other. After first period was over, in between classes, I would check my cell phone. As I was doing so, I saw that I was receiving a call from an unknown number. I didn't know who it was, so I didn't bother to answer. I put my phone back down on the desk and then prepared for the second class of the day. After teaching that class, I checked my phone again and then saw that the number had left a voicemail. I decided to listen to it. When I played the message, it was what sounded like a younger male's voice, and they were talking in almost a whisper. It was creepy, and the voice simply said, "Answer my calls." Then, literally moments later, the phone started ringing again. Taking the unknown caller's advice, I decided to answer. When I did, I heard that same voice again. He said, "I'm inside the school and I'm gonna get you." Then he hung up. I was really creeped out by this. I didn't know if he was serious or not, but being a new teacher, I felt like I should report it. So I called the principal and let him know about the threat made against me. The principal said that the matter would be looked into immediately. A short time later, a lockdown was announced. I followed through with the procedure for my classroom, and a few minutes after that, there was a knock on the door. Thankfully, it was one of the school staff members to ask me some questions. They talked to me in the room quietly, asking me what happened and stuff. Then they left and said that they were searching the school. The lockdown lasted for about an hour. When it was finally lifted, I was told that nobody suspicious was found inside the school and they thought that I was safe. And for the rest of the day, I was. Nothing strange or creepy happened, and I had no more texts or calls. After school, I did some grading and some preparations for the following school day. Then I went home. I lived in a one-bedroom apartment by myself at the time. That night, shortly before I was going to go to bed, there was a really loud knocking on my front door. I was really freaked out immediately. I remembered the threat that I had received at school. Now somebody was at my house. Whoever was there did not knock a second time. After a minute or so, I very carefully got up and walked over to the door. When I looked through the peephole, nobody was there. Whoever had done it must have left. I was really on edge and thought about calling the police, but I decided not to. I was on high alert for the rest of the night, but nothing else happened. It was tough to fall asleep, but eventually I was able to. The next day at school, I found out that the mystery had been solved. The number that I had received calls from had been traced to one of my students. He was a guy who hadn't shown up to class in weeks. I'm not sure if it was a prank or if he was serious, but he was kind of a troublemaker and hung out with a bad crowd. He had already been suspended multiple times and was suspended again for that. The really creepy part is that I'm sure it was him who showed up at my apartment. I have no clue how he got my number or address. Did he follow me home? That might explain the apartment, but still not the phone number. He was never in my class again, as he got expelled shortly after for selling drugs on school grounds. I'm glad that I never saw him again after that. One time a few years back, I lost my phone. I have an iPhone and I work in the city. I walk around on the sidewalks and stuff every day, so I go all over the place. The only thing I remember is that I got home from work that day and I just didn't have my phone. I looked around in my car and stuff and I couldn't find it anywhere. I realized that I must have lost it someplace, but I had no idea where it could be. And if I dropped it on the street, somebody more than likely picked it up. My apartment was not too far away from my best friend Amanda's house, so I walked over to her place. When I got there, I told her how I had lost my phone and I asked her to call it. From her apartment, we called my phone, and to our surprise, somebody picked up. It was a man's voice who sounded fairly young, but not like a teenager or anything. He said that he had found the phone on the sidewalk and wanted to give it back to me. I was really grateful and relieved to hear that, and then the guy said that he was currently at work. By that point, it was like 6 p.m. He said that he didn't get off until really late, and I had work the next day. The guy told me to come by his apartment the next night because he would get off a bit earlier. There wasn't too much of a discussion about it, but I figured that would be a safe enough place to get it. So we agreed on that, and overall I was just happy that I was going to be getting my phone back, even if I would have to wait another day. So Amanda said that she would call the guy the next day for me and told me to come over after work the next day as well. That night I had to use an alarm on my laptop, and it worked okay. I went to work the next day as usual, and when I got back I went straight over to Amanda's. I was told that the guy had given his address and we were supposed to meet at 10:15 that night when he got home from work. I wasn't real happy about meeting that late, but I figured there was nothing we could do. The address was an apartment complex, so I didn't feel too nervous or anything, but I still asked Amanda to go with me. So that night Amanda drove me in her car to the address. It was about 15 minutes away, and when we arrived it was in fact an apartment complex. However, it looked very sketchy. There were several apartment buildings all looking really run down. The lighting was terrible and beat up old cars scattered the pothole-filled parking lot. Right across from the complex was a giant wooded area. The apartment units had doors that opened up to the outside. Amanda told me the unit number and she said that she would stay in the car while I went to the apartment. So at 10:15 I exited the vehicle and approached the apartment building. I was somewhat nervous but brushed it off, and I was just happy to be getting my phone back finally. So I walked up to the front step and then knocked on the door. The lights inside of the apartment all seemed to be off. It looked like nobody was home. I looked around making sure that I had the correct place, and as I was looking around, I saw Amanda sitting in the car a good 50 feet away. She was in the driver's seat and she suddenly started frantically waving me back over to her car. I didn't know what she wanted, but it seemed important, so I left the apartment and walked over to her. When I got to the car, she told me to get in. As soon as I did, she told me that it looked like a setup. She said that she saw two guys just inside the woods watching me. When she pointed to the area, I sort of saw movement of people moving away farther into the woods. It was hard to tell who they were, but I was glad that Amanda had spotted them. Then she drove away and we left. As we were driving, she tried calling the guy and also tried calling my phone, but got no answer on either one. So at that point, we stopped along the way home and we called the police. They sent an officer to the apartment building to look around. We found out that nobody lived in that particular apartment we were supposed to meet at, and it was vacant. They also found my phone located just a few feet in the woods in that same area. It was returned to me, and I feel very lucky to have gotten away from that situation. I'm also really glad that Amanda went with me that night. One night, a couple of years ago, I was walking back to my car. I was parked on the side of the road, and it was nighttime by this point. When I got to my vehicle, I found this older cell phone on the side of the curb, sort of underneath my car. I picked it up and looked around. There was nobody else there at that hour. No other car was really close to mine or anything either. I guessed that somebody had just dropped their cell phone or something. It was pretty old, like I said, at least 10 or maybe 15 years old. But some people still use phones from back then, so I wasn't going to judge. I looked around trying to figure out how somebody dropped it there. I was thinking if I should just put the phone next to a tree and leave, hoping they would come back to find it, or if I should take the phone home and try to locate the rightful owner. As I was still holding the phone in my hands, it literally started ringing. So of course, I answered it. It was a man's voice on the other end who said hello, and I asked who was calling. The person on the other end just said, "Who is this?" He sounded confused, which was reasonable, and I said that I had just found this cell phone on the ground and I was wondering who it belonged to. The person told me that it belonged to a guy named Vern. I asked how I could get the phone to Vern, and the man said that he would tell Vern to meet me after his job the next night. He mentioned a park and said to be there at 9 p.m. and then hung up. So I took the phone and then went back to my apartment. I realized afterwards how weird it was though. How did this guy know exactly when and where to arrange this meetup between me and Vern? He didn't even ask if it was good with me. He just said that's what we were doing and then hung up. I was suspicious right away that maybe this was not a good idea. But what else could I do? I had someone else's phone. I couldn't just keep it. I was expected to be there to drop off the phone the next night. So I figured that everything would be fine. I just had to be vigilant. The phone didn't get any more calls for the rest of that night though, or the next day. I was curious, and I tried going on the phone to see the other contacts, but it was locked. When the next night rolled around, I drove to the park that I was instructed to go to. I had never been there before. The park looked really sketchy. There was a small parking lot, and it wasn't very well lit. In the end of the parking lot by the corner was this one old white SUV, and it looked like it was a late 90s Suburban. I had a terrible feeling about it. That was the only other car in the entire parking lot. I arrived right at 9 p.m. and figured that the other SUV was probably Vern, but I couldn't tell who was inside of it from where I was. I didn't really want to see who it was though. I just had a terrible feeling, so I just drove right up to this park sign that was at the entrance. Then I rolled down my window, put the cell phone on the park sign, and then quickly drove off. As I was leaving, I saw the SUV start to drive towards me. The crazy thing is that the SUV didn't even go for the phone. It started following me. As soon as I made it out of the park, I took a left and then another quick left. I don't think the SUV saw me make that turn, because it wasn't close enough at that point. I didn't see it following me after that either. Then I drove back home. Looking back at that experience, I really think that that was some sort of a setup. I might have been robbed or something if I had gotten out of my car. I wouldn't be surprised if that cheap phone that I found was only used for bait. I mean, to get one call right after I picked it up and then never again seems fishy. Also, how did that guy know exactly where Vern was going to meet me and when? And why wouldn't they go get the phone instead of being worried about following me? I'm really grateful that I got out of there when I did.